As lovely as one on trees. It is great to be with you all today. Give yourselves a round of applause. Honestly, I had no idea when Councilor Presley and I wrote this hearing order, we had no idea that the interest would be so great. And just to see all of you here on a early Monday morning is a testament to how important the issue that we're going to discuss today. My name is Matt O'Malley. I am proud to be the chairman of the City Council's Committee on Environment, Parks, and Sustainability. And I'm enormously grateful for my dear colleague and friend, City Councilor at Large, Ayanna Presley, with whom I wrote this hearing order discussing the quality and coverage of the tree canopy in the City of Boston. We're going to hear from our incredible panel of mayoral administrations, including Commissioner of Parks and Recreation Chris Cook and his team, followed by some academics and experts on this, and then public testimony is open to everyone who would like to speak. There are sign-in sheets in the back. If you would like to testify, please circle or check off the box next to the word yes, and we will stay here until everyone has an opportunity to weigh in on this important issue. I often say that as an environmentalist, the benefits that come with caring and nurturing and building a stronger and more sustainable environment are ones that every fiscal conservative should apply by. The same could be said for trees. We all know how beautiful trees are. We all know what enormous advantages and benefits they offer, including reduction of stormwater runoff, help avoid flooding, absorbing carbon emissions, reductions to asthma rates, create more comfortable microclimates. I'm sure many of us will get an opportunity, hopefully later today, to sit underneath a tree as the temperatures climb into the 90s. They mitigate air pollution. Other countries and other cities are using the growth of trees as a way to address climate change. In China, they are looking to plant 6.6 million hectares of new forest in the heavily polluted Hubei province to address issues of climate change. Additionally, we are very lucky to have, and we're going to hear from some great partners later in this hearing, I'm sure. We have some great parks, we have some great playgrounds, we have some great open space, much of which was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who once said that the purpose for urban parks is to provide the feeling of relief experienced by those entering them and a sense of enlarged freedom. We may actually hear from Mr. Olmsted later this morning, and I want to make sure, I know we all want to make sure that his vision and that essence of which he writes is brought into a reality. I remember long before I think any of us were serving in any capacity, or in the particular roles of which we're serving now, former Mayor Menino had an ambitious goal to plant 100,000 trees by 2020. We are nowhere near to that goal, but we've done some great things. The city's done some great things in that regard. We're going to talk about it. We're going to address ways we can make it better and ways we can work together. So I'm really excited about this hearing, really excited to hear from some of our experts, and most importantly, really excited to hear from each and every one of you. So I would like to now turn it over to my colleague and friend and the co-sponsor of this, City Councilor at Large Ayanna Presley, for any opening comments or thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your friendship and for your partnership on this hearing and for being a leading voice on so many issues related to environmental justice. I view every issue in the city through a lens of health and equity, and where trees are concerned, it is certainly no different. I filed this hearing order because while this body and our city have articulated and practiced sustainability and environmental stewardship, neighborhoods like East Boston and the Seaport, who recently dealt with unprecedented flooding, suffer, or rather there's an inequity of trees in those neighborhoods, those communities that are most vulnerable to climate and to sea level rise. Now more than ever, we are experiencing the consequences of climate change and its effect on our seasonal and temperature norms. And one of the more profound consequences of the loss of our trees, especially our mature trees. Now nationally, and I'll be curious to know what we're finding locally, but nationally, 30% of trees in American cities have been lost to development. And while we are in the midst of our third biggest building boom, again, I'd be curious to know what the impact has been here locally with the loss of mature trees. And we also know oftentimes mature trees are being uprooted because they are creating a public safety hazard and upending our sidewalks. And so how are we addressing that? Trees, and especially mature trees, are a vital natural resource offering direct ecological, economic, and health benefits to the community. And of course, I know all of you know this, and I'm talking to the choir, but we do have people that are watching from home, some who have questioned although we have received an incredible outpouring both in emails and in social media interest about this hearing, there are those who have questioned, really, why does this matter that much? So please indulge me. Trees produce a host of positive effects for cities, including reducing stormwater runoff by intercepting rainwater in their canopies and root systems, mitigating the heat island effect, which lowers surrounding temperatures and cools the internal temperature of nearby buildings, increasing property values in some cases by up to 20%, and reducing rates of asthma and other respiratory ailments. And further, studies have shown that in inner cities or inner city communities, anxiety, depression, and even crime are lowered in a more landscaped environment. So it's time we keep pace with what the demands of climate are forcing us to do. Again, this is about health, this is about equity, this is about public health, this is about beautification, and this is about climate mitigation. And so we want to ensure that every neighborhood in the city of Boston has an equity in all of those benefits, both from public health, from beautification, and also climate resilience. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. And again, I thank my co-sponsor here for partnering with me in this, and let's get to it.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. Brief housekeeping items. I have 3 letters from colleagues who will not be able to make it, but will be tuning in or watching the tape after the fact. The first is District 1 Councilor Lydia Edwards, who writes, "Thank you for your leadership bringing attention to the issue of the amount of quality of tree coverage in Boston through this hearing. I send my sincerest apologies for my absence, as I have had a long-standing commitment." Councilor Edwards goes on to go on record and support expansion of tree coverage across the city, including in the neighborhoods that she represents, East Boston, Charlestown, the North End. She goes on to thank advocates, including Melinda Vega, whom we will hear from later. She looks forward to continuing the work. Councilor at-large Anissa Asabi-George writes, I regret that I am unable to participate in today's hearing on tree coverage in Boston. I would like the record to reflect my deep concern about the loss of mature trees and green space in the city. The contribution of the health of our environment, our quality of life, our own health cannot be overstated. She looks forward to ongoing attention to this issue. And finally, at-large Councilor Michelle Wu writes that due to her son's child care facility is closed today, so she'll be watching from home rather than enjoying the hearing in person. Thank you to the sponsors and advocates for continuing to remind us how important our tree canopy is for fighting for climate change. This is being broadcast live and streamed online, so again, please know if we hear from you later in testimony, it's part of the public record. And so let's get right into the first panel. Carl will introduce. Sir, Carl, if you want to introduce yourself and then introduce the panel, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. I'm Carl Spector, Commissioner of the Environment. I'll let the other members introduce themselves.
Chris Cook, Commissioner of Boston Parks and Recreation.
Liza Meyer, Chief Landscape Architect, Boston Parks.
Greg Mossman, Tree Warden.
Max Ford Diamond, Deputy Tree Warden, Boston Parks.
Okay, so I am delighted to be surrounded by my colleagues from the Department of Parks and Recreation, who will be able to give a lot of detail to, I think, the questions that you will have. I will make a few brief opening remarks, and then Commissioner Cook will, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions. So thank you for the opportunity to testify today concerning Boston's urban forest and its relationship to important environmental and climate concerns. You have already described the many benefits to public health, community life, environmental quality, and the local economy from a robust urban forest. Because of this value, Imagine Boston, the mayor's plan for Boston for the next 15 years, states that we will collaborate with the Boston Water and Sewer Commission to expand green infrastructure systems and the tree canopy to improve Boston's ability to manage stormwater, reduce runoff to improve water quality, and mitigate the urban heat island effect. Similarly, and earlier, the mayor's 2014 Climate Action Plan includes the action, create a clear, actionable tree canopy plan to increase tree canopy coverage to 35% by 2030. This will contribute to our efforts both in climate adaptation and in greenhouse gas reduction. The commitment, as you pointed out, to increase the tree canopy goes back to the previous administration, when the city was a member of the Boston Urban Forest Coalition, a collaboration no longer existing of nonprofit city, state, and federal organizations. As noted in the city's original 2007 Climate Action Plan, in April 2007, the Boston Urban Forest Coalition announced an ambitious program, Grow Boston Greener, that aims to plant 100,000 additional trees on public and private properties in Boston, growing the city's canopy cover. An important aspect of the 2007 goal and of the more recent restatements is that this effort involves many partners and requires the utilization of public and private resources. Following the 2007 announcement, the city established some grant programs to incentivize the planting of trees by neighborhood groups. Another important step was the City of Boston's Complete Street Guidelines, which provided detailed information about the inclusion of trees and rain gardens in the streetscape. And over the years, as Chris will describe, the city's own investment of resources has increased. Green infrastructure and trees remain an important component of the city's climate and sustainability plans. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. After Commissioner Cook's remarks, we will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be very brief. Our final tree canopy was completed in December 2017. It's important to note that this was in partnership with the Trust for Public Land. It was conducted by the University of Vermont, and it concluded that roughly 27%, we have 27% tree canopy coverage in the city of Boston. It's very, very important to note that this study was based on 2014 LIDAR flyover data. And so it's really an approximation of what the tree canopy was in 2014. So moving forward, we'll have to be aggressive about looking at further studies to make sure we can assess properly where we are and what our goals will be from that. I want to remark to the council that it's very, very important that tree canopy coverage is in relation to healthy tree canopy. To that end, in addition to our planting and our pruning dollars that we receive from the city budget, Mayor Walsh, with the City Council's hopeful final approval, has allocated $100,000 for trees in parks. The reason this is important is that for many years we were not able to properly maintain the tree canopy in our parkland. This parkland actually serves as a vital resource for the overall tree canopy. I'd also be remiss if I didn't recognize the hardworking members of the Urban Forestry Division in the City of Boston. Joe Dinsmore, Daniel Ross, Stephen Kendall, Max Ford Diamond, Greg Mossman, also our tree warden. They are the folks that at 2 a.m. in the morning are responding to emergency calls, and in addition, they're helping us plan the city and making sure that we have adequate tree canopy. I also want to thank all the Friends groups who are involved in expanding the tree canopy and also taking care of the tree canopy in the city of Boston. I'd be remiss if I started naming them because I get in trouble for the one that I didn't name. But I want to thank them all for being here. I want to thank them for their additional support. In the interest of time, happy to answer any questions the councilors have because I know there's a lot of public testimony you're waiting for.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else have opening statements or want to get right into it? Okay, great. Thank you. So 27% is the tree canopy coverage after there was a flyover conducted in 2014, Commissioner Cook?
That's right.
Okay, so 27%, and the goal is to get it up to 35% by 2030, so it's ambitious, but doable, certainly. And there was another, and I think I know the answer to this question, but there was MIT has a website, Treepedia, which has it significantly lower. It has Boston at 18.2% coverage. Now, they say that they use Google Street View's sort of panorama, so that would be shots from the ground as opposed to from the air. Do you think that explains the discrepancy? In other words, chances are the Arnold Arboretum, for example, wouldn't have a street view on all the paths within the park.
So when I'm in front of the city council, I don't often have the opportunity to punt to a doctorate from Boston University, but your next panel will actually have someone who can explain that difference. What I'll say in general is that the LIDAR data is presumably far more effective than Google Street View. It gets down to the granular level of anything that's over 8 feet, recognizing it as a tree. Moving forward, that technology has improved yet again, so hopefully further tree canopies will even be more accurate.
And is that the first sort of study that we've done as a city?
It's not the first canopy study, but it's the first we feel that it's the first reliable data set that we have. So it's the first opportunity that we've had to really benchmark our current state of the canopy. Now keep in mind, again, it's crunching numbers that were data in a data set that was collected in 2014. Liza, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I would add that the University of Vermont has done these canopy studies for many major cities in the U.S., and I think they'll be a great partner for us to be able to continue to work with over time. Whether the number is 27, 29, 25, of course it matters, but I think what matters more is understanding the trend. So whether we're starting at that number or something else, if we can keep looking at that over time and get a sense of where we're being successful and where we're struggling, that will chart our path forward, less so whether it's a Treepedia number or a UVM number. So I think we can rely on working with UVM, hopefully every 5 years to look at this data. Is that the plan to do?
That was my next question. So do it every 5 years.
That's what they recommend, and that's what other cities do, and that's what we'd like to do.
So will we be conducting one next year then?
So we won't be conducting one next year, but we hopefully in the following fiscal budget, we would include it. So the idea would be that the data set's no older than 5 years. So we'd be looking at including an FY20 budget.
Okay. In ballpark, what does it cost?
It's well over $100,000. The most expensive aspect of it is really the actual flyover and the technology that's used.
And okay, so I think that's helpful to sort of understand where we are. I think 27% seems to be sort of more average. Obviously, we can do better, and I know we all are committed to that, to getting that up to 35%. Greg, you weren't here when we had our budget hearing with Commissioner Cook, but I wanted to single out you and your team specifically for a fantastic job, particularly this year when we had 3 or 4 nor'easters over a 2-month period, addressing that, keeping the streets safe and passable. Do you have any idea of how many trees we lost as a result of the climate change created extreme weather events in February and March?
I could definitely get you those numbers.
Was this the most in your experience, the most in sort of one season in your time working for the city?
Yeah, a few years back we had all those microbursts, hurricane, superstorm Sandy.
Yeah.
That was pretty bad too.
Okay. And so specifically, let's talk a little bit about there was a media article not too long ago, probably a week or last Sunday, I believe it was, that talked about since 2007 and sort of the plan to plant 100,000 trees, that just under 10,000 have been planted and just closer to 6,000 have been removed. So it's been about a 4,000%. And again, much of this predates us in these roles. So this isn't about blaming. This is really about figuring out what happened and how to avoid the mistakes of the past. Is it that sort of trees were planted willy-nilly? Is it gas leaks that have caused it? You know, gas leaks obviously have effect on the health and well-being of trees, and it's one of the reasons why we've taken action to address that. What are some of the reasons why we haven't had more success?
Well, I'd be happy to talk in general. One of the items that the article highlighted is that's the actual number of street trees planted. Okay. And so some of the opportunities for planting, and in fact some of the really opportunities for radical change are in large-scale development projects or large-scale roadway projects. So that wouldn't be captured in our street tree numbers. And we would benefit as a city developing a system along with our colleagues in the Environment Department, Public Works Department, Transportation Department. When we go into these projects, we try to prioritize tree protection, and certainly Liza and Carrie Marsh do in their comments on large-scale projects. But we should also track the success of new tree plantings as part of those projects and make sure that we're rolling those up in the overall numbers. We do want to stress that, and this is not a knock on any previous goals, that I do think that the focus should shift from total number of trees planted to that tree canopy number. The tree canopy number actually provides more planning opportunities to make sure that we're addressing some of the stormwater management, some of the heat island effects, the benefits that we're trying to get from those trees. I think it's easier to plan when we look at canopy coverage in a certain neighborhood on a certain street, and certainly from the city as a whole. So there's opportunities, but as far as some of the reasons why we can't plant in the right of way, so that's specifically what the article was referencing, It's all of those things that you listed. It's finding available planting locations. It's development in the city of Boston and whether or not there's new curb cuts. It's prioritizing accessibility on sidewalks. And it's, gas leaks and other environmental concerns. And then in addition to that, I would also say that the number one suspect in tree mortality is often the carbon-based life form humans, right? Whether it's a moving van or some other incident, we often contribute to the mortality rate of street trees. So Max would correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our current mortality rate is near 20%.
That's for trees planted. Yeah, we average about 15% of the trees that we plant die within the first year.
So again, that's
And
why.
I'm sorry, is that average? Is that high? Is that low?
It's high for the average for the country, yes.
And
We were between a 15 to 20% average for tree failure for new trees planted.
And what's the number one cause? Hello, Councilor.
Maintenance, money to afford to be able to maintain the trees in the way in which they need to be.
Okay.
It's like taking care of a child, right? You need to spend money to take care of that child. And our funding sources have not given us the ability to, until this year, to properly maintain those young new trees. So they in turn have died. And our contractors replace them for free under warranty for 2 years. But we have no data after that 2-year set of what the failure looks like after that.
And when do most of the trees sort of die in that area? Is it is it after the first winter or the first sort of?
So we do an inspection right after they're planted, and that's usually like a 7% failure rate within 3 months. And then a year later, we do another inspection, and that's where it ranges between 15 and 20%. And then we do one final inspection after that, same thing, 15 to 20% failure.
And Counselor, if it's helpful, sorry,
Yeah.
Carl. Max, would you please describe the current new contracts specifications that hopefully will help with the mortality rate?
So for FY18, I wrote a new planting contract that put more money into watering and maintenance of the trees that are planted. I also, with the GIS department, came up with a tracking application that is in each of the watering trucks, so I can see them live every day where they go. I can see for how long they are at each tree that they planted in their contract. So that took up an extra $150,000 of our planting budget, was just to make sure the trees get watered and maintained better. We also added a supplemental fertilizer pre-drench for the trees. So when we plant the trees, we drench it with a fertilizer, water retention, fungicide to help the tree hold water better and sustain, because that tree pit had a tree die in it probably 6 months before to a year before, and then we're planting it in the same pit. So to give the tree a better chance, we've added that nutrient aspect to it. We've also started staking and guying the trees again, as well as adding a gator bed, the watering bags, onto the stake of the tree to help, get the roots of the tree to spread out farther instead of staying in that confined space. So overall, water, nutrients, and the new planting spec, they've cost us probably an extra $210,000 to $220,000 for this planting contract, but in hopes that it will decrease our failure rate.
Yeah, no question. It seems to me that is one of the best investments we can make.
Absolutely.
If you're not familiar, it may sound like a large sum of money, but as we're talking about a $3.5 billion budget, we're talking about all the benefits that come from trees to make sure that they can grow. That's worth it. So I will say, this body will be voting on the mayor's budget in a couple of weeks. Again, we rejected it with just a formality last week, and then it's resubmitted for those watching at home. I would urge that we make sure that your department has as much money as you guys need to make this reality.
I'd like to say that our planting budget has stayed the same. The number of trees that we plant depends on the cost.
Yeah.
So when you take $225,000 out of that $700,000 budget, you're planting less trees every year. The more that you
But they're going to stay around for,
Hopefully
five years
yes,
from now, we'll have more
exactly.
trees than, we shouldn't be doing it without strategic. Good.
Yeah, those new tree specifications are very hopeful they will reduce the mortality rate.
Yeah.
Councilor, if I may,
Please.
I'd like to emphasize a couple of things that Chris mentioned. That as long as we're talking about first of all, I agree with him that we need to focus on the overall tree canopy as a better measure than just the individual number of trees. So that obviously that's important. And as we think about the tree canopy for the whole city, the number of the street trees that we have, my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are about on the order of 40,000 street trees in the city of Boston, but in Boston overall, there are about 400,000 trees for, on private and property, public and private property, so that the street trees for which we have the most data, and my colleagues at the Parks Department do a marvelous job monitoring that and working on that, but the population for which we have the most data represents only 10% of our overall urban forest. So obviously we want to make sure we're giving proper attention to our street trees, but that's only a small part of addressing our overall goals for increasing the tree canopy.
That's a fair point. And the 27% tree canopy coverage includes both street trees, public, private. Correct. Our institution's great. I want to be respectful of my colleagues. I have more questions, but I'll wait till the next round. We've been joined by District 7 City Councilor Kim Janey. Welcome, Councilor Janey. Councilor Presley.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And bear with me. I have asthma, which is why we need more trees. Right. So bear with me here. But, Commissioner, I just wanted to pick up on just revisit development and zoning in particular. And as I'm thinking about all the development happening in the city and the community benefits agreements that we are, as councilors, often at the table, helping to play a role in negotiating. I just wonder, from a development and zoning standpoint or from a CBA standpoint, have trees ever been factored into this? I shared the number nationally that we have lost 30% of mature trees because of development. And I know there were some numbers bandied around here based on mortality, human error, and things like that. Can you guesstimate, and also about extreme weather? Yeah. But do we know how many trees in the city of Boston we've lost because of development, and then how are we mitigating that? Sure. And I do want to give a shout out to Melinda Vega and other neighborhood efforts, but I'd like to see those in development, or perhaps our colleges and universities, playing more of a role intentionally to supplement this. Yeah.
So it's an excellent question, and in a lot of ways, it's the question about tree canopy. It's when you're talking about land use, what is an appropriate land use to both prioritize expansion and certainly protection of tree canopy versus the other uses that the community desires. So the answer is no. We don't know how many trees that we've lost to development. What we are hopeful, though, is now that we have a benchmark of this tree canopy study, when we analyze it further again, we'll see either a decrease or an increase. I can talk a little bit about some of the protections that we put around trees through the development process. So first off, just for street trees, and again, as Carl points out, this is a very small sliver of the tree canopy, but in the right-of-way, public shade trees, they're protected by Chapter 87 of Mass General Laws. And Greg, as the tree warden, makes recommendations to me about whether or not a tree can be removed for a variety of reasons in the right-of-way. That has a formal process. We have a tree hearing process that we follow. As far as development, there's two main reviews that happen where the Parks Department specifically has the opportunity to influence the number of trees or the planting plan. One is Parks Commission, and that's the 100-foot rule. So if you're within 100 feet of a Article 97 protected open space, the Parks Department, you need approval from the Parks Department on your project. And during that process, it is very, very common, specifically for our chief landscape architect, to write comment letters about the vegetation on site. The other review is through Article 80. This is something that's been fairly new for the Boston Parks Department to participate fully in, but in Article 80, large project review, in some cases small project review, there's an opportunity for different city agencies to comment on projects. Because we view tree canopy as so important, because we review the potential effects of stormwater management or heat island effect, a project so important as to the work that we do as far as our investment in trees, we often comment on most large projects in the city of Boston. And again, that would include focuses on not only the relation to other open space, but also what they're doing to either expand or protect tree canopy on site. Let my chief landscape architect illuminate further if there's any.
I would just pick up on your earlier comment, Councillor Presley, about community benefits and trees. And in a lot of these projects, development projects that come in, the community is deeply focused on parking needs, off-street parking needs in particular, because there's so many demands on parking in neighborhoods that really animates the discussion around development projects. So what we see a lot of times are projects that are coming in with parking lots that have very few trees in them because they're trying to max out the number of parking spaces in there in order to accommodate community requests, which makes sense. Every project has, competing interests. But we've been working with the BPDA to advocate for more trees to be integrated into parking lots, but it comes at a cost for the number of cars that people can have off street, which people need to become more comfortable with. So as a dialogue in the city, that's something that we need to continue to press on to help people see that there's give and take with each of these decisions, and that if we want to add trees, it's going to take the place of something else, but there are benefits that we all gain from.
And how do you work in concert with the community preservation, so with CPA and that money allocated towards open space? Does that in any way play a role in making sure that we're keeping pace or being more aggressive in reaching our tree canopy goals?
So it's a really good point, Councillor, and it is an opportunity for the city. I was remiss to not mention the leadership of the Environment Department. During those reviews, they also provide reviews during Article 80 that's very useful and often very useful for tree protection and also plantings. But as far as Community Preservation Act, the city actually views investment of trees as a capital expense as opposed to an operating expense. So pruning of trees is operating, but when we actually purchase trees to put them into the ground, especially in the right-of-way street trees, that's a capital expense. And in addition, parks includes trees in its park projects, its park capital projects as a capital expense as well. So through that lens, you could look at Community Preservation Act as an opportunity for planting because it's restricted to capital, not maintenance uses. What would be very important, though, is that it can't take the place of existing capital funds. So to put it another way, the city can't get off the hook by accessing CPA funds for something that the city was already obligated to do. So we would have to make sure to treat those plantings as an opportunity for new funding, not as a replacement funding.
All right, and then my last question for this round, I think, is what is the criteria? So, we have 311. If people want a bike rack someplace or want something, repaired. I know people use that when there is an accessibility issue and a problem with a mature tree, again, upending a sidewalk or something like that. But how can the various neighborhoods be heard in terms of where they would like to see trees? How do we have that two-way conversation? And then secondly, how do you prioritize that? So how do you determine what neighborhoods you're going to put online relative to tree canopy? Because I do see trees, since they do have this integrated benefit for those neighborhoods that need an enhancement in their property value, for those neighborhoods that have a higher density of asthma rates, for those neighborhoods that are more vulnerable to climate and to sea level rise. It seems like those should be fast-tracked. So we have a rationale that we're better understanding around slow streets. So now I want to understand what is the rationale and how do we onboard and fast track the neighborhoods in the greatest need.
All right, so there's two tracks of the question there, and I'll let Greg speak to some of the challenges that we find in finding planting locations. But in general, we do rely on 311. We rely on the community to give us planting locations for desired locations. That being said, we have to prioritize certain areas. So while we rely on the public to give us 311 requests for new trees, and we do have on our website all the different concerns that somebody should take into account before they give us a planting location, we don't necessarily expect the public to go through that long list, and often the public just sees a spot where they think it would be nice for a tree. We will then go and inspect it. One of the things that we did is we tried to adjust our SLAs because the community could get very frustrated that it might take 18 months for either a tree to get inspected. So we've cut some of those inspections down to a year. And again, Greg will talk about some of the complications that we have with finding a plantable location. The idea of prioritizing neighborhoods is something that strategically we just have to address as part of climate change and as part of equity. So something that you and Councilor O'Malley have mentioned in your remarks, the idea that East Boston suffers from low canopy compared to the rest of the city. You know, a lot of that has to do, frankly, with the large industrial use, whether it's the airport or other surface areas that are over in East Boston. But it does mean that we have to prioritize planting over there. So when we look at opportunities of if there was ever a potential redesign of Bennington Street, is there a way that the Parks Department could participate fully in planting that entire corridor, where currently we now have plants that are in planters that are not providing anywhere near the same ecological benefit that street trees would on that street. But also, we'd be remiss if we didn't partner with groups like NOAA. So this past year, our tree warden, Greg Mossman, in partnership with NOAA, actually purchased 2 bicycles that have a watering tank on the back of the bicycle, so that the kids from NOAA can provide additional water to different street trees in East Boston. That's for care for what we have. But we also do try to, when we go into a neighborhood, we try to get a critical mass of plantings available, and frankly, that's just to save money on the planting contract. You know, if you're planting one tree 13 miles away from another tree, there's no efficiency to that. So when we go into neighborhoods, we try to take care of all the planting locations. Greg, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the challenges of finding a planting location.
Sure. So there's 2 ways trees get planted. One, a 311 request, or when we cut down a dead tree, it automatically goes back in. Not all of those locations are replantable, mostly because of ADA standards that have changed since the tree went in 50 whatever years ago. We also look for conflicts with water lines, gas lines, underground utilities. A lot of the telecommunications stuff is underground in a lot of these neighborhoods now, so we obviously don't want to interfere with the utilities when we put these trees in. And then the other things would be like too close to a light pole, or we wouldn't want to put a tree right up by your front entrance to your door to your house or your apartment. So there's quite a few things that we look at when we go out before we approve a tree to be planted at that spot.
Okay. So what would be the summary statement of how we prioritize from an equity standpoint?
It's very important to prioritize from an equity standpoint. But it's interesting that equity could be looked at through several different lenses, right? So there's the equity of what neighborhoods don't have enough canopy, and there's also the equity of neighborhoods that would benefit from further expansion of their canopy. So it's interesting when you talk about slow streets, you know, the studies that are fully treed streets, people actually do drive slower on those. So if you have an opportunity to have an intervention of a lot of street trees, you can actually help with pedestrian car fatalities. So I think we're going to have to look at through equity through multiple lenses.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. Certainly want to thank everyone in attendance for being here at this hearing. Just wanted to kind of follow up on the process. And I'm glad that you mentioned Commissioner Equity. I'm wondering, as we look at, let's say, a 311 request,
Sure.
And clearly not everyone in our city utilizes 311, so I think also making sure that we're looking at, you know, the greatest need and who could be, who could benefit, as you already mentioned. But let's say someone did use 311. What is the actual process from beginning to end? So a resident has requested a tree. You come out, you look, you see if it's utility lines, gas lines, et cetera. What else do you consider? And at what point is that individual or is that resident then kept in the loop, engaged throughout this process?
Sure, so I'll let Greg answer that.
We won't plant a tree unless the resident requests it. So very often, we take a tree down, and the homeowner does not want a tree to go back. And that's sort of a policy thing that we can't put a tree somewhere that someone's not going to take care of. Because when we do try to do that, we'll be picking it up off the sidewalk after it's been ripped out of the ground. It's kind of a waste of time and money. We only plant if someone makes a request.
Right. So I have a constituent who has made a request, and they have not heard back. So I'm wondering,
Sure.
like, what is the process? So they've put in a 311 request, then what's the next step?
So they should be notified back by 311 that it's going to be on a queue to be inspected to see if it's plantable. If they're not, that means there's a problem, and it means that I would love to reach out to that constituent to find out why they haven't been. So they would be notified through the different parts of the process.
They would be notified.
Yeah,
because
if it's through 311 and the contact information is there.
So oftentimes you get it like a case closed. You don't necessarily get, here are the next steps in the process. So I don't know if that was the case with this specific incident, but that's often what happens.
We would love to follow up on the individual constituents concerned. They should be receiving feedback.
And if trees are removed, so I've heard from, other constituents about trees being removed, just kind of understanding, what has gone into that decision. Is there a process in place?
Sure. So to talk a little bit about the tree hearing process, again, I'll let Greg talk about that.
Yeah, so regular maintenance, the tree's looked at by a certified arborist. There's 3 of us, and the determination is made in what you're describing to remove the tree. They will get an inspection note back through 311 that the tree is going to be removed, and then that could take another 6 months before the tree is actually gone. Tree hearing process is different. If you want to put a curb cut in front of your house for a new driveway and there's a tree in the way, we have to hold a public hearing for that. That has to be advertised for 2 weeks. And that's the opportunity for abutters, neighbors to weigh in on the tree removal.
Council, we actually put the pardon me for interrupting, we actually put the notice on the tree itself.
Yep.
In addition to notifying the abutters? Or no, just on the tree?
Put it on the tree.
On the tree?
And it goes in the paper.
Right, so I know with over Roxy Homes, Camden Street, there have been some trees removed. One, I think, was because of a development that came. Do neighbors, other than posting on a tree, do neighbors have the opportunity to weigh in and let their thoughts be known?
That hearing process is public, and so constituents can do 2 things. One is they can send us a letter, which is often more convenient for the constituent, and we'll weigh that into the decision, or they can actually show up and testify in person.
And they're notified? So I'm trying to understand the noticing piece of it.
Yeah, so
beyond the
in
posting
addition,
of a flyer on a tree.
So we advertise the hearing publicly like we advertise most of our commission hearings, but I think the most effective is actually posting the actual tree so that people know specifically what we're talking about.
And if a tree is dying or dead, does that require neighbors to then make the 311 request?
So 311 is most useful when the community is using it actively. However, if members of the Boston Parks Department or other agencies are driving around the town and they see something that they're concerned about, we encourage them to put it into 311 as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's it for now.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. So a couple things I want to sort of get into, and the purpose of my sort of set of questions this round is to figure out how we can get you guys more money and more resources, because I think you have a good plan, you have a great team, we all are on, this is one issue that we all are in complete agreement. We want more trees, we want to grow the canopy coverage. Commissioner, we're both commissioners, I think you're right. The issue here is looking at the canopy coverage as opposed to individual trees, which sometimes the 2 can be conflated. But one of the things that I thought was unfair in the recent media article, which I told the reporter, he listed the removal of the KC overpass in Jamaica Plain as a way that many trees were removed, yet neglected to mention the fact that there will be significantly more trees, so that by the time, and mature trees planted as well, so the time in 2019, 2020 we do that second audit, we're going to see more, better coverage in that part of Jamaica Plain. So I guess my question is this. Do we have any loose policy that perhaps could be or ought to be codified as an ordinance in terms of if trees are removed for a construction project, X number of trees need to be planted on site, or there needs to be some sort of a fund paid into, similarly the way we do with linkage?
So only in regards to street trees, which is not what you're talking about. So in street trees, there's a value placed on the diameter of the tree. And so that gets paid to the Boston Parks Department, and we use that for planting and for tree activities.
So, so walk me through this thing. I would, a street tree, a healthy street tree being removed.
If it has, if it has to be removed as part of the tree hearing process for whatever reason, whether it's a large-scale development or it's the reconfiguration of a home or ADA compliance, things like that, there's a value placed on that tree based on the diameter, and the proponent has to actually reimburse the city for the cost of that.
And how much revenue have we generated for that?
I can get those numbers back to you.
I wouldn't imagine a lot.
No, and again, that's really just the small sliver that's the street tree, so it doesn't talk about what I think what the root of your question was, is do we have a policy on development? No, but I would say that the BPDA and the Environment Department, along with the Parks Department, has shown great leadership in prioritizing tree protection. Yeah. And so what we suspect is that further analysis will begin the development of tree protection standards, which would be important moving forward.
Do you know of anyone aware of what other cities are doing in regard to that?
Other cities do protect trees on private property, and other cities have no tree protection whatsoever.
Sure. No, I understand. No, and I think again we're doing well, and even the sort of default policy that exists now is a good one. I'd just love to see us sort of strengthen it and to maybe be able to get you guys more resources, non-taxpayer funded resources to address this. That's one. The second is the gas companies. I was very proud, and Mayor Walsh signed it into law. We have several mothers out front here passing the gas leaks ordinance right after Christmas several years ago. It's currently in litigation because the utility companies are taking us to court. But a huge percentage of that is of the trees that die after 3 months or a year have to do with the 3,500 gas leaks or so in the city of Boston. So I wonder, is there any mechanism for the utilities to have to, when we can show a clear cause of death of a tree by a gas leaks, is there any mechanism here that we can recoup some of the costs from the utility companies?
To my knowledge, we haven't done that yet. Is that correct, Carl?
Well, Councilor, as you know from the ordinance, instructs the administration to develop a procedure for that. Members of my department have been doing that. We have been, both in terms of collecting the more data, or developing protocols to collect more data, and also to look at protocols for making the kind of determination that you describe about that there are some differences of opinion about whether you can actually say for certain that this tree was killed by a gas leak, and we have been working with several researchers in Boston to try to develop, can we develop a very clear protocol that we could use in a legal process if necessary, but at least in discussion. So we're continuing to work at that instruction that's in the ordinance about developing that kind of protocol.
Okay. Any idea on what the timeline would be? I understand again litigation is pending, but by the end of the summer, by the end of the calendar year, do you think we could have some? I mean, it's in your department, Carl.
I'm always reluctant to give you a date, Councilor. So I'm going to say no, but we are continuing to work on it, and I'm happy to give you updates as we go on and let you know where we are. Our thinking that if we can develop a draft protocol, actually to put it out and let people comment it on, both for all the stakeholders and and the people in the neighborhoods who might be interested in this to examine it, and so we can all have a firm basis for making those kinds of determinations, both within the Parks Department and the Environment Department, the other departments involved, and of course members of the community.
Understood. And then finally, there was a photo that caught my attention. I tweeted it out a couple weeks ago. I forget the town. It was in the Pacific Northwest that had the city planted a tree, and they had a card on it which read, "This tree will give us $293 worth of benefits this year." And then it illuminated it. Stormwater runoff, 6,500 gallons. Carbon reduction, 417 pounds. Electrical energy savings, 206 kilowatts. Property value increase, $81. It seemed like a simple thing, but I think it was a great way to explain to more people just the benefits of this. So I'd hope that maybe we could do that. I mean, I would think, you know, between the brilliant people sitting before us right now, that we could sort of figure out ways how to phrase that and get that out there.
Well, actually, Counselor, so I think that's a very good idea, but just very briefly, I'll talk about the card that we do place on our new trees. Max, would you mind talking through not only the card that we put up, but also the inspiration for the card?
Correct.
So the Beacon Hill Civic Association 2 years ago started putting placards, laminated placards on trees in Beacon Hill saying that they were newly planted, and telling them about the tree and how they could find out more information from the Parks Department website, as well as how to care for the tree. So what we have done is I created a card similar to theirs that's from the Parks Department itself that says, "We planted this tree here, please water it X amount of times with how many gallons of water, 15 to 20 in the water bag." And you can also go to this website if you want to find out more about how to maintain mulching the tree pit, weeding the tree pit, maintaining it in the future, and then any requests or questions, they can either make a 3-on-1 request to us and I will answer it, or our staff will answer it, and so on and so forth. And that seems to be a hit so far with
Correct.
people actually understanding what they're supposed to be doing. It's creating a lot more legwork on our end now of answering questions, but it's better to have questions than people doing nothing about
Absolutely.
it. So.
No, I think that's fantastic. I wasn't aware of that, so thank you for that
Yep.
work. Even expanding it, maybe incorporating technology with a QR code or something that maybe
Yeah,
people could scan.
eventually,
I think
yeah, that
we could
would
do
be
some
awesome.
exciting things with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I want to be respectful to all of our guests, so that's all for this. For my questions for this round, Councilor Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From a 311 perspective, again, getting back to the two-way conversation, do you track sort of data on where the requests are coming from the most? Do you have a sense of that? Could you speak to neighborhoods that have made the most requests for trees by 311?
Counselor, it would be information that we'd be happy to analyze and return back to you.
Okay. All right, great.
Yep.
I was just curious about that. And then also, just so that I'm clear and for the record, so the city currently has in its budget how many arborists or tree wardens?
So there's 5 individuals in the Urban Forestry Division, 3 of which are arborists, and we have 1 tree warden and 2 deputy tree wardens.
And is that
Those are all not different positions. They all wear different hats.
different hats? Yeah. And is that commensurate and on par with comparable cities of population and with our larger goals here?
I would have to provide a comparison analysis for you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And so from a resource standpoint, I'm just thinking about our libraries where, you know, as a body, we all certainly see the value of libraries, and thanks to the advocacy of those respective friends groups, you know, over time, and also their supplemental private fundraising and community caretaking of these libraries, we've made great strides. And I was just curious if that exists. I know there are some groups like the Garden Club of the Back Bay and NOAA. Right. Do you have an inventory of neighborhood and community-based efforts that are focused on this? Do we have informal friends groups relative to the trees, neighborhood by neighborhood? Because I'm just wondering how we can support them since they're providing such an important
That's right. We have an informal list and we have a formal list we'd be happy to share with the council. I would say that they break down into 2 different groups. There's staffed nonprofits who are engaged in these activities, and then there are total volunteer organizations that are engaged in these activities. So volunteer organizations would include groups like Southie Trees or Rosy Trees, and then you have folks like the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, as well as the Friends of the Public Garden, both of which have made significant contributions to the urban canopy. Again, I'd be a little bit remiss to start
Yes.
naming them all because I'll
Yes,
get
I understand.
a little bit of
We don't want to
trouble.
leave anyone out. We want to
Yeah.
show an equality of love.
Yeah, that's right.
But I just want to make sure that they get their due credit, but also that we are being more intentional in our outreach and ways in which to support them since they are providing such an incredible service. So
It is. You're absolutely right, Councilor. And in fact, they've actually moved the needle. What's interesting is we're hopeful for further canopy studies because that advocacy of those groups has changed the way we approach our large-scale capital projects for parks. So, for instance, when you look at a project like Medal of Honor Park in South Boston, we had a net average, we added over 40 trees to that park. When you look at Smith in Alston, we added, through that capital project that's ongoing right now, we're adding over 150 trees to those. If it wasn't for the advocacy of those specific groups in those communities, I don't think the Parks Department would have been as aggressive with the planting.
the other thing I'm intrigued by, and I didn't learn until today, or wasn't reinforced to me, that this is considered a capital expense, because it does seem that it should be a budgeted expense across many agencies, certainly including the Boston Public Health Commission. You know, I chair the Committee on Healthy Women, Families, and Communities, and we just provided for the council the 2016 annual report on the health of Boston. And again, given the disparities that were shared and the overlay of those disparities, I'm sure that they overlay perfectly with those communities that also need to grow their tree canopy. So I wonder if we could consider a budgetary investment that would not be limited to capital, but we also see maybe even BTD, because being multimodal, and certainly I'm very passionate about walkability, more trees supports that, right? So I just think that's something that maybe my colleagues and I should explore and pursue, a greater investment in BTD, BPHC, and again, you're already doing what you're doing on the capital side. My final question is, I remember attending a community meeting several years ago, part of the Franklin Park Coalition, to address an insect that was killing trees. And so I just wanted to ask if there's anything we need to be aware of. I'm specifically curious about the emerald ash borer or Dutch elm disease. Are these things that we need to be concerned about?
So there are things that we should be very concerned about. To illuminate more, I'll let Greg speak to it.
Dutch elm disease has been in this country since the 1940s, I believe. We have an active program which basically boils down to removal of infected trees, but we also monitor the bugs themselves so we can better know when to apply insect controls and the fungicide controls, because the insect is what brings the fungus to the different trees. Emerald ash borer, we don't have it yet, but we're going to have it. The good news for us, it won't be as devastating as it has been in other parts of the country and Canada, because we don't have a lot of ash trees. The 2006 inventory that was done had us at about 6%, and in the 15 years I've been here, we haven't planted a single ash tree. So we're going to lose some trees. I think we ran the numbers. It's going to be a significant amount of money to remove all our ash trees, but you have two choices. You can remove them or you can treat them. Partners like the Emerald Necklace Conservancy are going to start actively treating some significant ash trees. But other than that, we'll probably lose all of our ash trees.
And Councilor, just to apologize, just to clarify, the emerald ash borer has been found in Massachusetts, has been found in the Emerald Necklace. It just hasn't been found in Boston Parks.
Correct.
I see.
And the meeting you attended was for the Asian longhorn beetle, which is declared eradicated in the city of Boston.
Excellent, okay. So you can have success through treatment?
Yes. But it's ongoing.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just caution any optimism around the emerald ash borer in places where that's been present. It's the eradication of ash species.
I see.
Yeah, if you look at Asian longhorn beetle out in Worcester, they did majority of removing of the trees as it's a better, faster, quicker way of getting the pest out of there. Treating is not 100% successful, and it costs a lot, and you're going to be doing it every single year to save one tree. And that's why we don't plant monocultures in Boston. We don't plant one species of tree. We plant 30 of them so that we don't have this problem hopefully ever again. But yeah, there's a big discussion between treating and removal options.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. Just to follow up on that before I get to Councilor Flynn, with the Asian longhorn beetle. It was right around this time in 2011. I was a newly elected counselor, met with Ned Friedman and others from the Arboretum. I think it was a case study of how to handle it. I think the Arboretum lost a total of 2 or 3 trees in dealing with ALB, and in Worcester County, if memory serves, it was about 60,000 trees that had to have been removed, which, to put in perspective, there are about 35 or 40,000 trees in the entirety of the Arnold Arboretum. So it was done exceptionally well. It could have been devastating, but kudos to your shop. I mean, the feds came in. It was a big thing. We had USA. I know many people here were part of those conversations as well. It was handled exceptionally well, and thankfully, we haven't seen a reemergence. Thank you, Councilor Ed Flynn, my dear friend, colleague from District 2, for joining us. Did you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and to Councilor Presley and Councilor Janey for your leadership on this issue as well. I apologize for being late. I had a meeting on public safety issues. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Could you run us through, maybe you answered it already, so I apologize, but could you run us through the procedure of notifying the public if a tree needs to be removed? What is that process like? What is the notification like?
Sure.
And what is the reasons? And the reason I'm getting at it, I have seen over many years, you know, with the ongoing development, you know, across the city, are we losing trees because of construction and development in the city?
Yeah, I just want to be clear about 2 different things. I'll let Greg talk you through the tree hearing process, but we also remove trees for emergency purposes on a very regular basis. Usually that's when the tree has already hit the ground. However, there are cases where it's leaning so precipitously that we actually have to remove it just for public health purposes. In that work, in that emergency tree work, we do not notify the community. Often that's in the middle of the night or at the height of a storm. But then as far as the official tree hearing process, I'd like Greg to speak to that again.
Right, so in the case of development, so for a curb cut or something like that, we advertise it for 2 weeks in the Boston Globe, and a sign goes on the tree itself. And then any abutters have the chance to come into the hearing or email, phone call, whatever, to weigh in, whether they're in support of it or against the removal of the tree.
And if there's no response from the neighborhood, generally would that tree be removed?
If nobody protests, yes, then the way the law is stated, we can allow the removal of that tree.
Okay, I don't know if I'm on board with that policy, but what about if you don't see the notification in the Globe, or you don't see it on the tree, and you're kind of out of luck?
Yeah, I mean, we just go by the guidelines that are in Chapter 87 of Mass General Laws. We fulfill the requirements.
So we're going to tear down one tree to that's the benefit of the neighborhood, so someone could get access to parking?
Councilor, it might be helpful for our chief landscape architect to talk a little bit about the process.
To add to that, there's a design review process that accompanies the tree hearing process. So if we see an opportunity for modifications in the proposed design to take place that would allow protection of that tree, that's absolutely part of the tree hearing process. A lot of times we're seeing these same projects come through the Public Improvement Commission process, which is also a design review process. So there's sort of 2 opportunities for the Parks Department to weigh in to help protect trees through design modifications. So yes, that if we can have them shift the driveway, or sometimes people are thinking they need to remove a tree because there's not enough space from where they're proposing their curb cut to where the tree is in its existing condition. Sometimes we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis and say, you know what, we think you can actually make this work if you neck down your driveway a little bit. So we always look for those opportunities, whether people protest it or not.
Could we ask if the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services and the district city councilors could be aware of those meetings, so we could also get information out to the impacted neighborhood?
Councilor, we'd be happy to work through IGR to make sure that there's better notification.
And the district city councils?
Yeah, we would work through IGR on that notification.
Okay. Yeah, just as a district city council, I'd like to know when a tree is going to possibly be removed from my district. That'd be important to me. I just want to make sure I have information that I would need to explain to the neighborhood why it's happening, instead of, finding out at the end and then explaining what happened, what the process was. I'd like to know almost on day one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey?
Thank you. So just a quick follow-up. First, just want to thank our chair for this hearing, and certainly the sponsor, Councilor Presley. Just some follow-up questions. One, I heard you mention that we're definitely going to lose some trees. I think you said it, based on these diseases that are out here. Is there a plan to then replace these trees in place? Do we know when we're going to lose the trees, and at what point we're going to be planting new trees to take their place?
So it's just an approximation, but we would suspect that ash might represent as much as 10% of our overall canopy that is susceptible to emerald ash borer. So you would think that over a period of time, it is highly likely that we would remove a lot of ash trees as part of that. A lot of that canopy would be on places that we would consider parklands or other highly vegetated areas. And so I think as our analysis of this threat proceeds, we would have to be aggressive about replanting in those areas.
Good. And again, just back to the 311, really important to kind of look at having an overall plan, making sure that equity is at the forefront, just because we know not everyone is utilizing the 311 system. But to follow up, I think it was you, Commissioner Cook, around watering. You mentioned that if you're going to plant a new tree, important that residents kind of take ownership. Sure. And so that would be a tree that is in front of someone's home.
Yeah.
They requested a tree, 123 Main Street. They're going to adopt that tree, just like they would shovel out the hydrant on the street. They would adopt that tree and take care of it and water it. Let me ask you about larger green spaces that are not quite parks. So over the weekend, I was in the South End, saw I think it was Rutland Square has a nice little green space there. Actually, there's this giant large tree too that's, I don't know if that's ADA compliant because it takes up the whole sidewalk. But they have this kind of little island in the middle of the street. I noticed kind of a hose and a watering box. I'm wondering how other communities get access to those types of things to take care of the trees and the other green space when they have it. So there's Chester Park, there's Elm Hill Park. I think I mentioned that to you before. How do we make sure that when it's not the tree in front of your house, but it's this larger space, that residents have access to the water that they need to care for the green space on their street?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we can work with community groups to develop. I mean, some of those communities, some of the parks that you mentioned are actually where the community itself has invested in a water box in partnership with the Parks Department. I will say that the majority of those systems that are in place are for ornamental watering, and so those are for the ornamental plantings that are present there. They're not really used for trees. Trees and parklands are not under necessarily the same stresses as our street trees are. It's really important for street trees to receive as much water as possible when you're looking at just the conditions they're in, whether it's flushing out the buildup of salt in the root systems or flushing out other things, other ways from the street. We'd be happy to partner with any community group who's interested in trying to develop a way to take care of the trees, honestly.
Okay, I'd love to follow up with you on that.
Sure.
That's great to hear. That's it for me. I know there are a lot of people here who may want to
Thank you, Councilor Janey. We'll end with my favorite question to ask you, or my favorite answer, Commissioner Cook. What's the average minute walk that every Bostonian has to a park or playground in their neighborhood?
Well, not every Bostonian, but nearly every Bostonian can walk to an open space in 10 minutes or less. That's
fantastic. Great job. Thank you all. I'm going to now invite our next panel down. I'd ask you, if your schedule allows, to please stay, if you can, at least to hear from our second panel before we get to public testimony. Thank you all. For our second panel, we have David Meshalam, Amanda Rich, Lucy Hatira, Paige Warren, and Melinda Vega. If you wouldn't mind just please joining us down here. Good afternoon. Sure. Thank you. Perfect. We'll make sure we get them. Thank you. Okay. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome. Did you just want to start briefly introducing yourself, going down the line? Or actually, if you would mind introducing yourself, if you had a brief opening statement, and then we'll go on down the line.
Sure, of course. My name is Amanda Rich, and I'm the program director with Speak for the Trees. And thank you very much for having us. And it's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces. So thank you so much for listening to us today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paige Warren. I am a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in the Department of Environmental Conservation. My expertise is in urban ecology. I've been doing urban ecology research for about 18 years in lots of cities around the country. One of my areas of expertise is in issues of equity in the distribution of benefits to people in the city.
Thank you.
Hello, hola, mi nombre es Melinda Vega. My name is Melinda Vega. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator in East Boston Neighborhood of Affordable Housing in NOAA. And I'm just very thankful for being here. Thank you very much.
I'm Lucy Hutira. I'm an associate professor of Earth and Environment at Boston University, and for the last nearly 10 years, my research lab has been studying vegetation in the city of Boston and also greenhouse gas emissions in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Daveen Meshulam, and I'm co-founder, along with Amanda Rich, of a new organization called Speak for the Trees. And our organization is committed to building a large and healthy tree canopy in Boston. So you just met our panel of experts, and I'd like to just begin by thanking several people in this room for convening this hearing and inviting us to testify, especially Councilors Presley and O'Malley. And considering the press and response that this hearing has received, this is clearly an issue that has resonated with many citizens around this city. I'd also like to thank the previous panel and Commissioners Cook and Spector and their staff for sharing with us their work. They clearly have maintained a healthy tree canopy and with limited resources are committed to making sure that it grows and continues to prosper for the future. We'd also like to thank the many people we have spoken to. Amanda and I have been at this for about 18 months. And who have worked tirelessly on this issue for years, if not decades. And like Commissioner Cook, I'm going to take the fifth on listing them all. But there are many residents, organizations, and government officials, and we are amazed by your devotion and hard work. And I would like to, of course, thank the beings for who we are all here for, the trees. In every sense of the word, we would not be here if it were not for them. Today, Boston, like many cities across the country, are recognizing the multiple economic, social, health, and environmental benefits that trees provide. They mitigate against urban heat island, they clean our air and water, they improve our health, among many, many others. But we recognize that these benefits are not equally shared, not in Boston, and not in other cities. And although we recognize that trees alone won't solve the problems we face in Boston concerning climate and health, we also recognize that trees serve an important component in bringing us closer together towards building a healthier and more equitable city. So I'm here today to provide some context of the past work in urban tree canopy in Boston and suggest some ways to move forward, and my colleagues here will provide some science to back up what Amanda and I have as a mission. As recently as 10 years ago, Boston, under the Boston Urban Forestry Council, was a national leader in the field of urban forestry. And the BUFC brought together multiple nonprofits, and they worked together to advocate for more trees. And as you are well aware, in 2007, Mayor Menino pronounced that Boston would reach 35% canopy coverage by 2020, a promise recommitted to by Mayor Walsh and extended to 2030. Unfortunately, as you just heard, it is difficult for us at this moment to gauge how we are moving in relation to this goal and how we plan to reach it. And for the past year and a half, Amanda and I have explored why this is, why we find this in this situation. We have met people throughout the city who have worked tirelessly, including people at parks, especially people at parks, and other residents on this issue, and people who care deeply about trees. And we have found many success stories, and we invited today one success story. We found many success stories, both big and small, of collaborations with parks and planting and caring for trees. This is crucial and important work that must be supported and must be expanded. Yet despite these positive partnerships, it appears that we are no closer to the mayor's goal, and we ask, why is this? So we've looked at other cities, both locally and nationally, to see what they're doing. And in the Commonwealth, there are many urban tree organizations and nonprofits that are supported with funds from state and national agencies and local organizations, and their work has been guided by long-term planning. Similarly, across the country, we have noted success stories in which clear goals and measurable actions drive coordination between municipal, state, and federal levels that enroll multiple layers in the city, including corporations, national and local nonprofits, municipal agencies, and residents. And we have been impressed by these models and see no reason why Boston, with its enormous talent and resources, cannot return to be a leader in this field. Amanda and I, and Speak for the Trees, are committed as an organization to assist the city in seeing its mission through in a way that brings people together to plant community trees in order to build a healthy urban forest. And we heard of some innovative new ways that Parks is taking the lead on this, and we are eager to be a partner with them. We hope that today's hearing will be the first step in further committing the city and its citizens and following through on a decade-old vision for a healthy urban canopy. This vision does not stand alone. It is connected to Boston efforts to build a resilient and equitable city as articulated in Imagine Boston 2030, Climate Ready Boston, and other efforts such as Carbon Free Boston 2050 and Renew Boston. Yet trees cannot be just another add-on. They require a coherent action plan that aligns with cities' multiple short-term and long-term goals. So as we embark on understanding and planning for a healthier urban tree canopy, we look forward to working closely with the City Council, with parks and other municipal departments in achieving what I think we all agree is a shared vision and goal. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Did anyone have any brief opening statements in addition to David, or can we just get right into it? Perfect. Thank you. Professor Hutera, am I saying that correctly? Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'm going to punt the question from Commissioner Cook. You're familiar with the Treepedia MIT study?
I am.
Why do you think that number was so vastly different from what the city's number is? It was 18.1 or 18.2%.
Because it only saw a portion of the canopy. Those estimates, which I think they were very creative,
yeah,
and they took a global perspective. They estimated for like 30 different cities around the world, but it was based on the street view. It was some innovative implementation of new technologies, but it had a limited view depth. So it looked laterally at
yeah,
the height of the Google Street View car, and it missed anything that was beyond its field of view.
So that was sort of my thought. If it drives down the VFW Parkway in West Roxbury, it's going to see trees next to Millennium Park, but it's not going to take in the fact that there's 90 acres of trees.
Exactly.
Among
It's
different
inherently just the way it's implemented. It's a minimum estimate, not an accurate estimate.
Okay, that is very helpful. Okay, and then talk a little bit about, anyone can sort of, well, let's start, Ms. Vega, can you expand a little bit about the bikes program that I think the Commissioner referenced? Because I hadn't heard about that today, and this sounds wonderful.
So, let me give you a little background about East Boston, which you guys have already mentioned. East Boston is an environmental justice community. We are surrounded by water, so it's a peninsula, but we have no access to our water. We are the home of the airport, and we have a lot of environmental burdens that we face. Now, this program that we touched upon is actually a tree canopy campaign program that came from our youth program and the NOAA youth organizers. This is a campaign that came about from our climate resilient work that we do in East Boston. And basically, the idea was that we need more street trees in East Boston. We are at 15%, where more communities that have more resources are at 30% of their urban street trees. And so when we brought this idea to our young people were like, wow, that sounds like an amazing thing to do. How can we get the community buy-in? So we do what we do best. We did door knocking to engage community members. We went to our civic associations and asked for their buy-in. And of course they said, of course we want more street trees, we love trees, but the challenge is how do we maintain these trees? As they mentioned, their lifespan is basically a year because of the lack of maintenance. And so our young people came back and we did some brainstorming and we're like, well, this is definitely something we want to pursue and do. So does the community, but we have to come up with a plan for this challenge that we have. And so our youth came up with a maintenance plan with routes, and they created their own tree routes where we basically go around and water our trees in the bikes that were donated with trailers. And so we have collaborated with community members for them to be water sources. So in addition to the Parks Department for supporting us with our bikes, one of the challenges is where we get our water source. And so we have partnered with different restaurants, community members literally allowing us to use their water for a water source for our trees. So if you ever go around East Boston and you see a range from 5 to 9 young people, usually Wednesdays are days during the week, and Saturdays or Sundays during the weekend.
And do these young people get paid a stipend?
Absolutely, no. This is work.
Good.
So they, this is not our only project or campaign. They work around 15 hours a week. Although during the summer, this is the one campaign that we do focus our most energy on, because we do have other programming activities that we do that is not, the way I look at it is like that our tree canopy campaign is community organizing, and some of our programs, like a free kayaking program that we have on Constitution Beach, Thursday to Sunday, so if you want to come during the summer, for sure, you'll enjoy yourself with our young people that have kayaks there. So that's more of like a direct service.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great. And do you ever have a shortage of young people who are interested in doing this?
So, no.
No, I'd imagine this would be a great job for a young person. Earn a little extra money, do a great public service. I am hopeful that, despite the outward hostility coming from the federal government as it relates to climate, young people get it, I think, with every successive generation, and that's really important. So I would think this would be fun. So I would hope we could emulate this program in other neighborhoods of the city. It sounds fantastic.
So do I.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you. Professor Warren, you mentioned equity in sort of your opening remarks as how you've been focusing on this. Talk a little bit about, what we're doing well as a city and what you think we should be doing better, or what's a better way to sort of address that, if you'd be so kind.
I may slightly reframe your question,
Sure.
if that's okay. But first I just wanted to kind of distinguish between inequality and inequity, since we've been using the word equity a lot. So inequality to me, with respect to, say, canopy cover, would be just variation in the distribution of canopy cover, which we absolutely have very clear disparities across the city in the amount of canopy cover. Inequity, however, is systematic unfairness in the access to trees or in the process for tree planting. Either one of those things could be an inequity. And it usually refers to systematic unfairness with regard to race or income or some other factor like that. So a lot of my research has been done, in other cities. We've done work here in Boston that we published in 2014, where we found a relationship between income level, a positive relationship between income level and canopy cover. and suggesting that there is inequity then in access to trees. There's other analyses that Lucy's group have done that didn't find that relationship. So I'd say that the answers are a little bit mixed right now as to the degree to which we have inequity. Many cities around the country have inequities in association with income and race, with access to canopy cover. There's some other recent analyses that I could go into more detail about that are nationwide. And I think what we learned most from our analysis in 2014 was not because we were building our analyses on data sets that have already been described as flawed and not as accurate as the more recent LIDAR data that we didn't have access to when we did our analyses, but I think we learned some things that are robust to regardless of what the data sets we were using, because we were looking at very detailed high-resolution information on buildings and green spaces and things in relation, as well as to the canopy cover. So we found three major issues that make it hard to redress the inequalities across the city. One of which is just that low canopy neighborhoods have a few plantable spaces. They have a lot of built structure already in place there. And this is building on some of the things that I think our colleagues that were talking earlier were talking about in terms of finding plantable spaces. That our results really accord with some of the comments that they were making. You know, and even when you have green space that is theoretically plantable, how big of a tree can you fit into it? And so if you're trying to achieve a canopy cover goal, it's not just the number of trees, but how big they can grow. And so things like having a yard, you know, people's yards, people want to have space that's not got trees on it, as well as places that do have trees. And also that on streets, places like street sides, there's a lot of limitation to the size of the tree that you can plant. So that if there's overhead wires and things like that. So we were able to account for overhead wires in our analyses, but we couldn't account for some of the things that they were referring to, like things under the ground that could limit where you could plant some trees. So those are some of the big issues. I think there are things that can be dealt with for all of those issues that can help us achieve some of our goals. It's still very difficult to achieve sort of perfect equity, perfect equality across the city. But maybe there's some alternatives to just focusing on canopy in terms of access to green space. And some of our other work has found that you know, even small amounts of green space added to a high-density neighborhood, we found that adding the equivalent of 2 parking spaces worth of green space can add habitat for 1 more species of bird. So there's clear ecological benefits to adding even small amounts of green space in some of our work.
Great. Thank you, Professor. And then finally for this round for me, Amanda, talk a little bit about the work you and David have done on your Open Tree app and sort of digital strategies to address this, if you'd be so kind.
Definitely. So basically right now we're really pushing for a comprehensive new inventory. Because really there's been a lot of discussion here today about 27%, and about the LIDAR data and the tree canopy coverage overall. But one of the things that we're not talking about, we don't know a lot about the age of these trees, we don't know the species, and we don't necessarily know a lot about the health of these trees. And so what we're really trying to push for is a new comprehensive inventory of what's going on within the city of Boston. Because recently, and I'll have Lucy speak to it because that's really why she's here, but there was a statistical sampling that was done a few years ago, and it gave us a profile of what's going on within the city of Boston, but David and I are really hoping to go back and really do a comprehensive inventory, because I think we really need to know more about what the age distribution is, what's going on from a species standpoint, because this is something some information that I brought for you today, in that we may be seeing some issues in relation to not planting enough younger trees. And that may potentially be an issue later on as some of these trees grow, and that and some of the older trees, obviously from a mortality rate, older trees die, and we may not be planting enough trees to then replace them. And so we need to know a little bit more about the age distribution. And also, too, in relation to species, right now at least, from the previous inventory that was done, obviously, and I think everybody really knows this, maple trees, and especially the Norway maple, really dominates the inventory and the population of our trees. And so when Commissioner Cook was talking about significant amounts of ash trees being removed, you know, we really need to have a comprehensive plan, also an urban forest master plan, to really understand what new species are going to be introduced when we start taking some of these out. Because when you're talking about domination by one particular species, that's really a problem if we're not understanding about the diversity. And so if we then go in and plant more Norway maples, and we do plant a lot of these all at one time, they have a designated lifespan. And so if we plant them all at the one time, then they may all die at one time. And then these particular neighborhoods are facing a lot of tree removal all at one time. And so, again, we don't know the age of a lot of these trees. And so we really need to understand a lot more about the actual trees on the ground and not so much about the 27% canopy coverage overall. So that's what we're really trying to do, and we're working with a team of Northeastern students right now to develop a new pilot protocol to do that.
Have you engaged at all? I don't know if they're still here, but I know the Emerald Necklace Conservancy was doing a robust sort of tree census on their property.
Yes, and so I have not talked to them directly, but
okay.
I've been looking at...
I have that right. You guys have been working on a tree census. Okay, great.
Yes, and so I've been looking at their study. I've been looking at a lot of different studies that have already been done within the city of Boston, and so we're trying to mimic protocols that have already been done. And so ideally, if when we move forward with this, we would like to bring all of those teams in together in addition to the study that Lucy recently did to essentially mimic and make sure that we collect all the same information so that we can compare apples to apples over time.
Yeah.
If I may, Councillor, just quickly, this app, Open Tree Map, is freely accessible, and the nice thing about it is that it provides opportunity for for residents in the community to get to know and understand their canopy. So our mission is to enroll residents where they live so they can become advocates like what we see in East Boston. That's a wonderful model. We'd like to work off that type of model and build capacity across the city. Arlington and Chelsea have already done, Chelsea's in the process of completing it. Arlington completed last summer a complete street tree inventory in 3 months of 10,000 street trees. It is possible. There are cities across the country who do this, and I think it's a wonderful model that provides not only the city and parks with important data, but enrolls residents in becoming part of the process.
No, absolutely, and I think turnout today is proof positive that there is tremendous interest. So that's all for me for this round. Thank you for letting me go over. Councillor Presley.
Thank you. Could you tell me what other cities?
Who do the Open Tree Map? It's really all over the country. If you go to their website, you'll see LA is involved in it. I believe Pennsylvania has one across the state, and I spoke to the DCR head in Pennsylvania, and he coordinates with cities throughout Pennsylvania. So they go out and they train cities, residents in cities. Locally, it's, well, I'm starting a pilot program in Watertown this summer, but Arlington completed one and Chelsea's completing one, and I'd be happy to provide you with a list of other cities.
That was helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was my next question. Other cities in the Commonwealth, so that was helpful.
And I'm not sure, I know Springfield and Worcester have tree initiatives, but I'm not sure they're using this app. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay. All right, and Melinda, I wanted to ask you, since we are so inspired and impressed by the effort at the NOAA CDC and appreciate the commitment of our youth, could you talk about the operating costs for that? I just want to get a sense to scale if this were something that we wanted to challenge other CDCs or community-based organizations to do. So how many youth, what are they being stipended?
So we have 9 youth workers, youth organizers. They get paid minimum wage, and they work 15 hours throughout the school year 15 hours a week throughout the school year, and then during the summer, it's full-time, basically.
Okay.
And I want to mention this that I did not mention before. Other than just the maintenance piece of this program, we do take advantage. So our youth are actually going out also watering and pruning the trees, but at the same time that they're doing this, they're also door knocking and talking to the community members advocating for them, educating and creating awareness. And I wanted to share one of the stories that really identifies why this is so important. So it resonates with people. So we've done this for about 2 years. This is our second summer doing this program. So when we began the program last year and we did the door knocking and all that stuff, I remember on Lexington Street in EC talking to one of the community members that she basically took us in, spoke with us for like a half hour, had some coffee and stuff, and she was really intrigued and really seemed committed and loved talking to our young people. The following year, this year, when we're going on the routes that the youth created, I stopped at her house and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. There's the beautiful tree that was identified, and it's on our route, so it's one of our trees that we water, and it's beautifully pruned, and you can see that it's well taken care of because all the mulch is like gorgeous. It has different flowers, and she also has a flower planter in front of her own house with the same flowers. And so she adopted that tree for sure. That's her tree, and that's what we want our community members to do. So it's not only because of all the environmental benefits that it does provide, and we do have those burdens in East Boston, but it creates and builds community. And to see our young people, do that and advocate and really, that's just amazing.
Everyone is taking pride and feels motivated to play that role, not just those extraordinary young people.
For sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I just wanted to ask, is there and I appreciate your offering the definition. It's important because we bandy around terms and we could be applying different definitions. So I really appreciate your parsing words, important in a conversation like this. We're a very competitive city, so I'm just curious, the inequities that we're talking about are challenges that systemically persist in every city. And I could argue that many of those systemic, entrenched inequities were created by design, really by policy, right?
Yeah, there's evidence for that. For
yes.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's much harder to disrupt and undo generations of that. But, talking about it and certainly advocating for, more tree canopies, some low-hanging tree fruit, I guess, for us to get at those larger inequities. But is there, again, these are the struggles of every city to reverse and to undo this hurt and this damage. And as I said earlier, as the chair of ostensibly what is the Public Health Committee, I am certain that, every other disparity that we're working to address, whether it's health disparities or environmental justice or economic justice, that they are overlaid with these communities that need trees, right? So I'm just curious, is there any city that you think is getting this right?
Oh, that's a great question. Boy, I wish I actually had a really good answer to that. Maybe I'm in the process of actually doing some looking around the world at about 32 different cities that we have really good data on.
Okay, great.
For this, but I would really hesitate to sort of give a ranking but I actually think that Boston's actually doing pretty well. That I can point to a lot of other cities that are far worse off in terms of the measurable amount of inequity in terms of income and race with respect to tree canopy cover specifically. And really with things like that we've measured about within the city of Boston proper for birds diversity. There's other cities that I've worked in, really stark differences in people's access to sort of,
well, that's encouraging to hear, and I do, supporting the earlier comments of my colleague and friend, Councilor O'Malley, at least we're not having to make the case. It seems that there's collective buy-in, and now we just have to make sure that we're making the financial investment and resourcing that buy-in to meet those greater goals.
Yeah, if I could just add too that I think this issue sort of a process is something you were raising, and it's a really important discussion. It's not something that I can comment specifically on in Boston, but we have evidence that the trees that we see now, they were planted a long time ago, and they're historic processes that led to the patterns of where we see things now, and processes that were exclusionary and were race-based and were, focusing around where wealth and power influenced where trees would be. And then sometimes, ironically, those neighborhoods then become, vacated by the wealthy and powerful people, and then occupied by more vulnerable communities now. So we're in some ways we can sort of benefit from and build on that turnover in population, so that now there are, for example, some, not just in Boston but other cities, some African American neighborhoods that have very high tree canopy cover, in part because of that turnover in population in the past. And so it's a legacy of past tree planting. So those are places that are great to continue building on, and building the capacity in those communities to maintain those high tree canopy cover. So.
Excellent, thank you.
If you don't mind me saying something, when you talk about the competitiveness against other cities and whatever else too, one of the things that we really brought to the table is, ranking Boston against other parallel cities, because I think that's critical to kind of bring that to the table and figuring out where Boston stands. And one of the things that we really looked at is looking at kind of the top 30 cities by population, and understanding not only canopy coverage, but also, do they have a plan in place to kind of move forward? And really, it was approximately 72% of these cities have an urban forest master plan or a management plan. And I'm not talking a climate action plan, a climate readiness plan, an open space plan, which talks about green infrastructure. It's specific to the tree canopy coverage, and saying, this is what we're doing about, distribution, and this is what we're doing about ordinances, development, maintenance, all of these different things. And it's kind of a centralized part of information. And so it seems like there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of information all over the place, and we have really found that a lot when we're trying to collect all this information, and even trying to form a treepository of information, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. And so I think even to move forward, we need some sort of plan and a task force really to get all of these people together and figure out what is the priority for Boston going forward from a development. And when we're talking about 27%, I think that's great. Even if we want to say that's great for now, we need a plan in place to understand how we can even maintain that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I add another opportunity for Boston to be competitive?
Of course.
Look what I started. Okay.
So we have an extremely ambitious climate action plan, arguably one of the most ambitious in the country, of net carbon neutrality by 2050. And the role of vegetation and vegetation loss associated with development has not been adequately looked at in that. The study that was just done by UVM is a quality study, but it is not the first that's been done. There's, as we just heard, there's a legacy of this. In 2006, there was a volunteer inventory of the entire city. The quality of that inventory in terms of the measurements, it could have been better, but there's definitely information there. We did a 10% resurvey of that 10 years later, and what we found 10 years later is that the city was approximately stable. The rate of planting to losses was nearly neutral, but it was trending down. The other thing is that Boston, in terms of the demographics of the size of the trees that we currently have that under public ownership, it's large and old. And that's wonderful for the city. That's part of why we have the high canopy cover that we have, is we have a lot of large old trees. But those large old trees have a lifespan. And if they die, which is when they die, we're going to lose some of that canopy. So I've had very productive conversations with Parks and Environment, and I completely agree with their viewpoint that this should be a question of canopy cover and trying to maintain canopy cover more than specific individuals. But an investment in the maintenance of those large trees, as well as planting, is really critical to get those ecosystem services. My group also did a study that was published in 2014 that was based on approximately 2006 data. That was also a LiDAR high-resolution remote sensing study. And we found 25.5% canopy cover. And That's no significant change between the UVM study and ours that was based on data from 10 years ago. I do think there was a missed opportunity in not directly comparing those studies. And I've had some conversations with Jarlath O'Neill Dunn from UVM, and I think his group and my group are both going to independently look at those and look at where are we gaining canopy in the city, where are we losing canopy in the city, and that we already have in hand a good bit of data to be able to look at that. The question you asked earlier about how much canopy have we lost to development, I don't know the answer to that now, but we have the data where in a month, one of my students is in the audience because he's chomping at the bit to be able to look at questions precisely like that. So we can answer that.
Thank you.
And with climate action, we are currently on a track that we will be losing more carbon from our canopy than we are gaining because of the demographics of the tree, not because of a mismanagement on the part of parks or anything like that. It's a demographics issue. And with additional investment, particularly towards maintenance, while also planting, we can potentially change that trajectory. And maintaining vegetation under development pressures will also do a lot towards that. The change in the contracting that Max Ford Diamond described is critical to be able to reduce the mortality rate of trees when they're being planted, but also extend the lifetime of the trees that we have in place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Presley. I appreciate everyone's time. It's been 2 hours now, so I want to thank this panel. You are dismissed is the word we use, although I hate using it, but we obviously invite you to stay. If you'd like to hear some of the public testimony, please do. I am going to read through a list of those that have signed in and indicated that they wish to testify. I'm going to read 3 names at a time. I invite you to line up either to the left or the right, and we'll ask for 2 to 3 minutes per testimony. First person that I have is Dorothy Farrell of Jamaica Plain. Dottie, you are up first, followed by Karen Mounty Broderick from the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, and Margaret Picorni. So Dottie Farrell, Karen Mounty Broderick, and Margaret Picorni. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, is it?
I think your mic will, as soon as you start speaking, it should
All
turn
right.
on.
Is that better now? No?
Not quite
No?
yet.
Tell me when you can hear me.
The little red light should go on. Hold on 1 second.
All right. Try the other one. Yes? So is that better? Oh, I can hear me now.
Yep, I can hear you.
All right.
Thank you.
Dottie Farrell from Jamaica Plain. So one question, when trees are planted after development, in development, what is planted are these little, I call them fetus trees. They're like this big. And I'm going to be 70 years old pretty soon. I'm going to be dead and buried before it's up here. So my question is, with developers, can't we regulate the size of trees that they plant? I just had a tree planted in my backyard from Mahoney's. The tree cost me $400. For Mahoney's to plant it cost me another $400. So, I mean, they need money to plant better trees. Please plant bigger trees. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Dottie. Thank you, and I agree with you completely. Thank you. Well said. Karen Mounty Broderick, Margaret Picorni, and Liz Visa is after Margaret. Hi, Karen.
Hi. My name's Karen Mounty. How long do I have? This is always good information for me to know.
2 to 3 minutes.
Okay. So I'm Karen Mounty Broderick. I'm the president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. I've had the pleasure of working for the City of New York Parks and the City of San Francisco Parks before I came here to the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. And I have to say, I've been really impressed with the professionalism and actual, I think, friendliness of the Boston Parks Department staff, and particularly their tree crew. And also really, really impressed with the fact that the Emerald Necklace Conservancy and many, many other friends groups, such as Friends of the Public Garden and all of the other amazing organizations here, actually raises private dollars to match city dollars for street trees. That had not been my experience in New York or San Francisco. So I think we have to realize we're in a kind of an amazing environment for that. So just to tell you a little bit about the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, we work and represent many overseers. So those are park and friends organizations, neighborhood organizations up and down the Emerald Necklace, starting with the Arborway Coalition, the Arnold Arboretum, the Boston Committee of the Garden Club of America, the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, Brookline Green Space Alliance, Charles Gate Alliance, the Emerald Necklace Greenway Project, the Fenway Alliance, the Fenway Civic Association, Fenway CDC, Fenway Garden Society, Franklin Park Coalition, Franklin Park Zoo, Friends of Jamaica Pond, Friends of Leverett Pond, Friends of the Muddy River, Garden Committee, Garden Club Federation of Massachusetts, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the Jamaica Hills Association, the Jamaica Pond Association, MASCO, which is all of the hospital organizations. It's a horrible acronym, so I'm not going to read the whole thing out, and the Museum of the Fine Arts, Boston. So we meet regularly to try and talk about how we can do more for all of the parks that are the Emerald Necklace. Now, the Emerald Necklace, of course, is not, does not represent every street or every tree in the city, but we've done some things that I think should be thought of a little bit as a model for what we might be able to do on a larger scale. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we do in addition, but I also want to mention that the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, through the Justine Me Live Fund, which is named after a legendary park commissioner here in Boston, we raise $1 for every dollar the city of Boston spends on its trees. And we have now, to date, leveraged dollar for dollar the city of Boston's investment, DCR's investment, and the town of Brookline investment. So we've now spent collectively over $1.7 million on trees. So that's both tree care, which is really important and not necessarily glamorous work, but that's tree pruning, other tree maintenance, soil investments, so adding additional fertilizer to soil, and also tree planting, and then tree removal, which unfortunately at times is necessary. We do, of course, always move to plant additional trees. We've planted over 240 new trees, and we've pruned over 1,700 trees, which is...
Sorry, what's the timeline for that? From what period to what time period?
Sorry, this work started in 2015. And today, we're attempting to address all of the trees that need to be pruned and maintained in the Emerald Necklace, and that is through our program of the LIFT Fund. On a quarterly basis, we meet with the town, with DCR, the town of Brookline, and the Boston Parks Department, and we plan the work that we're going to be doing in the necklace going forward. We have an inventory that includes over 8,000 trees. So we have done precisely what Speaks of the Trees was mentioning with all of the Emerald Necklace trees. We have inventoried the condition, the age, the species, the needed recommended maintenance work, and then we update that with all of the work that occurs either by our partners or us, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, and we directly contract sometimes to do work that sometimes the city isn't able to hire specific specialists to do this specific work, or buy certain testing devices in a quick time frame. So sometimes that's what we're able to do. I don't want to exploit my time here. I do also want to say that there was an article in the Globe that I think did bring out some important points, but I felt that it was unfortunate that some of the other environmental benefits of the daylighting of the Muddy River in front of the Landmark Center, and the fact that daylighting, decreasing the heat island effect, adding the new trees that are there, weren't discussed as much, and instead focused on tree removal, which is of course something we want to minimize in any event that it has to occur. So I thought that was disappointing. I was also disappointed that the benefits of the new project, essentially bringing the KC overpass down to street level and all of the new trees, there's already been 400 trees planted there, that wasn't as discussed, because I think we do have to add new bike lanes, we do have to add and improve these kinds of important transportation improvements that would lead to decreasing the eventual new CO2 new CO2 added to our atmosphere. So it's actually a big picture, sort of getting to an environmental impact. I also wanted to mention that I do think it's important that we think about what size tree we plant. And I know everyone always says, let's just plant a bigger tree. And I think that's really important. But we do know there are studies that show that the best tree you could possibly plant is like a sapling, it's a seed. So at one hand, we want to plant something bigger because we want it to survive. On the other hand, actually the best thing for the long-term tree is to actually plant the smallest tree, which is not what a lot of people, it's not an intuitive thing. And then I also want to say that I really want to commend the work of Mothers Out Front and Councilman O'Malley and all of your comrades who have passed this legislation, and we're starting to do more and more to focus on gas leaks. Gas leaks are a tremendous problem for our street trees. It probably is actually more significant than we know because we aren't able to know which trees are all being impacted, but I really think that's a big part of this conversation, which we should talk about more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Margaret Picorni, Liz Visa, Sarah Freeman on deck. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Should I go ahead? My name is Margaret Picorni, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Garden Club of the Back Bay, which is a completely voluntary organization. One of the first acts of one of the founders of our club, Laura Dwight, almost 50 years ago, was to plant the magnificent saucer magnolias in front of most homes along Commonwealth Avenue. This act of enhancing, protecting, and caring for the urban tree canopy has been our steadfast goal since that day. I would like to describe some of our activities as they relate to the importance of the urban forest. I hope that our example and some of our successes might inspire other organizations or at least present a few models for action. We are happy to share them with any organization that would like more detail. For the past 25 years, we've worked closely with 2 mayors and a series of parks commissioners in a partnership that has created a neighborhood with one of the highest percentages of tree canopy in the city. Working with the Parks Department, we have planted over 250 street trees, and we have for the past 20 years done the pruning of all 1,200 street trees in the Back Bay on a rotating basis. We've been able to allocate $20,000 a year to tree pruning in the Back Bay for the past 10 years. We've conducted 2 inventories of the street trees in the historic district, and the most recent was 2 years ago. In addition, this past month, we have completed an inventory of all the alley trees that are on private property and have created and launched a website called backbaytrees.org. These inventories have allowed us to monitor and identify dead trees, hazardous trees, removals, and replanted trees. Over the past 10 years, we've discovered that almost 40% of the alley trees have been removed, many without permission that is required by the Back Bay Architecture Commission. We have worked with the BBAC to develop guidelines for removal and replanting on private property and have tried to stem the illegal removal of trees by promoting the requirement that residents must get BBAC approval before removing a tree. In many cases, the BBAC is able to require the planting of a tree to replace the one removed. I believe that this is a unique agreement with the Back Bay Historic District, but certainly one that could be used in other historic neighborhoods. We are now in the process of inventorying front garden trees and look forward to having all of this information available on our website. These inventories are key. They are the linchpin to the success of all tree care in the city, and all of our inventories have been conducted by volunteers. In addition to this work contracted by us, we give modest grants to other organizations specifically for tree-related projects. There have been recent grants to the Esplanade Association, Friends of the Public Garden, Commonwealth Avenue Mall Committee, the Friends of Copley Square, in addition to organizations in other Boston neighborhoods where work is focused on increasing the urban tree canopy. Wherever appropriate, we engage in advocacy for trees, such as this hearing. We were also an active voice around the issue of gas leaks and tree mortality. For example, last year we took the Parks Department's list of tree removals in one area of the city and hired Gas Safety to test each empty pit for gas leaks before replanting was done. The results of this survey were very interesting, and we continue to be very concerned about gas leaks in our neighborhood. To protect our street trees, about 6 years ago, we got approval to install tree fences in approved standardized design. Not only do these fences enhance the streetscape, but they protect the street trees from compaction and animals. Neighbors make a donation to the Garden Club, which arranges for the fences, and we have installed about 160 fences since this program began. The fences currently cost $1,500 each. We've also recently worked with the Parks Department on 2 major plantings, one on Clarendon Street and one in the Charlesgate block of Marlborough. We organize volunteers and neighbors to water these plantings once a week and have provided extra gators and hoses where needed. This kind of community support is essential if the planting of new trees is to be successful. You can't just plant a tree where there isn't one and expect it to survive. This is the challenge of increasing the urban tree canopy. The element of community organizing must come from the bottom up. We have been very fortunate to have the commitment of our members to pursue these goals, and although it has been a long haul, 50 years, and not always successful, we are not about to give up. As others have or will say, the value of our urban forest on so many levels makes this work essential. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all of your wonderful efforts, Margaret. Liz Visa of Friends of the Public Garden, Sarah Freeman from the Arborway Coalition, and Allison Poltinas are the next 3 speakers, please. Hi, Liz.
Hi there. I would like to thank the council, and particularly Councilor O'Malley and Presley, for bringing attention to this important issue of Boston's tree canopy. Liz Visa, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Public Garden. We partner with the city to care for 1,700 trees in our 3 downtown parks, the Boston Common, Public Garden, and Commonwealth Avenue Mall. I will be brief. I know we're speaking to the choir, but I want to make a couple of points, very important points. It's funding and joint responsibility, the 2 that I want to reinforce here. In this year's budget, our city, our Friends budget, we will invest $500,000, nearly half of our overall park spending, caring for the 1,700 trees in our parks, including planting, pruning, disease control, fertilizing, inventory management. This is in 3 parks of 83 acres. Boston is 57,000 acres. So that's what we do and what these trees need in order to stay alive. Many of these are very mature. We have several elms that are the oldest elms in the Western Hemisphere, and it takes that amount of money to take care of trees of that stature and of any tree in the city. So it's important that the city be the leader in coordinating an effort of all Boston's property owners to not only increase the tree canopy, but commit to ongoing care in order for existing trees to thrive and attain significant size. The city's ambitious goal to plant 100,000 trees was, after all, intended to be met using city, state, federal, and private dollars, with a significant amount of tree planting occurring on private property. While institutions focus on meeting resiliency goals, they too often point to their LEED certified buildings alone. They need to be challenged to look at their campuses as well. So this must be a shared goal. Increasing the tree canopy to reap the benefits of mitigating climate change, building resiliency, and improving public health cannot be solved by trees in our parks and on our city streets alone. Parkland in Boston, both city parkland and state parkland, covers less than 6,000 of those 57,000 acres. We would also urge the City Council, we've heard from the panel about other cities. There are models out there for tree ordinances and how they have helped other cities protect their tree canopies with this kind of enforcement mechanism. Some good examples include Pittsburgh and Portland, Oregon. Pittsburgh also has an urban forest master plan. You heard that in the last panel. The Boston Urban Forest Council gave a document to the mayor's transition team in 2014, and they included in their recommendations support for an urban forestry plan and a tree ordinance. And again, inventories are important, but a plan, an actual plan about how we're going to protect the existing trees we have and add them is critical. So we look forward to working with the city to support a comprehensive program to realize this goal of increasing our tree canopy, as well as ensuring the health of every tree planted. Everyone loves planting a tree, but planting a tree is not the same as other capital improvements. The work is not done when we put them into the ground. It's only begun. And I mentioned that as my testimony over the Parks Department budget. This year's city budget, for the first time, has a line item for money for caring for parks trees in parkland. $100,000. We have tree care for parks trees. That is a drop in the bucket. That needs to be increased many-fold in order to do the work that needs to be done in all of the over 200 parks in the city. To reap the benefits of mature trees in our city, there must be steady, long-term care and commitment to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Sarah Freeman, Allison Poltinas, And our third will be Maria Fitzpatrick, please. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Freeman from Jamaica Plain on behalf of the Arborway Coalition. Boy, urban trees, as I listen, urban trees have a tough life between storm damage, gas leaks, development, natural aging, human impacts like car crashes, insects, fungus. It's a wonder that we only lose something like 20%, and it just points out how vigilant we all need to be. The Arborway Coalition, the Arborway is the part of the Emerald Necklace beyond Jamaica Pond. It's a DCR parkway, but still part of Boston, and our main park-like feature is trees. We've done a lot in terms of planting and watering and having young people we didn't get the bikes, but we had wagons and buckets and trying to deliver water. Having a water source near trees is a big, big challenge. We were a part of the Boston Urban Forest Coalition that has been referenced a number of times today already. We did 2 major plantings of 15 trees each time through that program. Many of those trees have survived on the Arborway hillside. And I just want to point out that the Urban Forest Coalition may not still exist, but as Liz Visa pointed out, some of their findings were captured in a transition document. And don't worry, I'm not going to try to read from the stack, but just a few of the highlights from the massive work they did over a number of years. This is their master plan from 2007-8. Who will plant the trees? Location planning, record keeping, fundraising, planting opportunities, sites, planting opportunities, programs, public education, outreach. They had a corporate partnership recommendation, a marketing plan. A ton of work has been done, and so just suggesting maybe we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Would love for us to get a more concrete plan moving forward, and thank you in advance for anyone pitching in.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Allison Pultinas, followed by Maria Fitzpatrick, followed by Michael Nichols.
Hi, I'm Allison Pultinas from Mission Hill. Been involved with tree stewardship for 25 years. I hope to suggest some radical ideas. Like Sarah and others here, I was part of the Urban Forest Council 4 years ago. And, excuse me, a #1 goal there was to have an urban forestry master plan, but to work across departments. This is not just a Parks Department issue at all. This is Boston Housing, this is Boston Public Schools, Public Works, Water and Sewer, and obviously Boston Planning and Development Agency. The tree issue is a major citywide climate issue, and a radical idea is not thinking about street trees so much, because sidewalks are actually probably the worst place to plant trees, and certainly medians as well. But thinking about land that we have right now that D&D owns, that is sitting unutilized, and maybe they're thinking about housing, but maybe it's a neighborhood that is lacking tree canopy, and create a forest there. Use the land that we have now to think about what is needed in the future. Looking at the Urban Forest Council recommendations, environmental review. It has to cover all trees. It can't just be about the sidewalk trees. Look at Boston Public Housing. Some of our best, largest tree canopy right now exists on green space outside housing developments that were built in the 1940s. There is nothing in any protection for those trees. When those developments are rebuilt or demolition happens, those trees are lost. In Mission Hill, we lost the trees at Mission, Maine. At McCormick in South Boston, we lost those trees. Look at the schoolyards. Where the trees are on Center Street in front of the Curley School, those trees were planted by Earthworks, an organization I was involved with for 10 years. You can do that. You don't have to have a lawn. You can plant multiple species in those places, and that's a benefit for everybody. So environmental review, a comprehensive strategy. I'm not so concerned about inventories, frankly, or counting. One tree does not equal another tree. It's very, very hard to count the number. These are moving targets. We're losing trees with climate change because of storms and heat and drought. A group I've been involved with for the last 5 years, Friends of Milneacast Boulevard, that's a project that happened with initially the state and the city transportation department. We're going to take out more than 200 30-year-old mature healthy trees that have been growing unencumbered by utility wires with large root space. And for the last 5 years, we've been advocating for a redesign that preserved as many trees as possible. Right now, the plan is down to taking about 60 trees. But because of the way contractors work in this city, there's no guarantee that it's going to be only 60. We're still advocating for a better design. You can save individual blocks, don't have to be duplicate twins of the trees across the street. It's okay if you have large trees on one side and new growth on another side. So we're still working on that. That's a project that we need help with the City Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maria Fitzpatrick, Michael Nichols, and Ford Cavallari.
Hi,
Maria.
I'm Maria Fitzpatrick. I'm from Dorchester. I want to disclose that I sit on the Parks Commission, but I'm here as a private citizen. The reason I came today was because of the environmental justice aspect of this hearing. I feel as a constituent in the city of Boston, I am recently a homeowner. I feel that I am extremely burdened by environmental pressures. I have I-93 in my neighborhood. I have Next Gen coming over my head in my neighborhood. I have suburban commuters driving through my neighborhood, pollution, emissions coming from all directions. This, of course, impacts the environment around me and the quality of the air and water and the earth that the trees are planted in. I have had the privilege of sitting on the commission, and I have discussed some of these issues with developers, and it's been very illuminating. Unlike other cities, the city of Boston does not require any open space requirement from these developers. They're getting world-class amenities. They're getting the beautiful ocean, the parks, the trees, and everything that we have to offer to sell their condos, basically, pressuring other people in the neighborhoods to leave. And all of this is extremely overwhelming from an environmentally justice place. So I've simply come to this hearing to ask the City Council to be bold and to think about the funding that we need to maintain our parks, to keep them safe, to keep our trees alive, to keep our water clean. We are getting more and more people in our city, more and more cars, and we are not getting any more funding to take care of the environment. It's crucial for environmental justice. It's crucial for sustainability. It's crucial for the quality of life in our city. And as Bostonians, I think we pride ourselves on the beauty and the quality of life in our city, and it has to be maintained. Maintaining the tree canopy is part of that. So look to Houston. They get they have a nice ordinance there with their developers. There are municipalities outside of DC that are able to get employee fees from the billion-dollar nonprofits that don't pay property taxes. it's a little bit off track from what we're talking about here, but we can't take care of the tree canopy, we can't take care of the parks, and we can't take care of the people that use the Boston Public Health Commission if we don't have funding. And that is what the crucial part of maintaining these trees and our city is about. And I just would like to have that addressed in an open and transparent way with the developers and the nonprofits and the commuters, because we need more funding to be more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
No stranger to the City Council. Hello, Mike Nichols. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. My name is Michael Nichols. I'm the Executive Director of the Esplanade Association Boston and also a resident of Audubon Circle here in the city. I want to thank Councilor Presley for a timely hearing order on the subject, Chairman O'Malley for calling the hearing, and each member of the council that joined us today and watched from afar for giving attention to an issue that probably doesn't get near enough attention in the city. As others have done earlier, I was just spend a couple of moments talking about the work of the Esplanade Association. We are a 17-year-old nonprofit that is 100% privately funded and works to revitalize, maintain, program, and enhance the historic 64-acre Charles River Esplanade in partnership with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. The Esplanade Association has grown to now contribute over $1 million per year into our park, much of it in organic horticulture, vegetative management, planting ornamental gardens, lawn maintenance, tree care, and most recently, tree succession planning. While the recent Boston Globe article on Boston's tree canopy focused mostly on tree coverage on city-owned property, we need to be contributing to enhanced plantings throughout the city, regardless of who owns the land. The advantages of significantly more trees and tree canopy cover in Boston are numerous, and I'm sure have been covered by many today. Though it's worth highlighting that every citizen of Boston benefits from the fresher air, the cooler temperatures, stored and filtered stormwater runoff, and so much more due to widespread tree coverage. On the Esplanade, there are presently 1,700 trees, plus an additional 150 in an area between the Esplanade and Charles Gate Park, for which the Esplanade Association has recently begun providing care. Our group's care for trees largely began with 2 tree inventories, one performed in 2004 and a later one in 2015, which has informed our annual tree care efforts since 2015. These inventories demonstrated that the condition of the Esplanade's trees worsened significantly over those 11 years, with just 44% of the trees in our park rated good just 3 years ago. Since then, the Esplanade Association and several of our funders have partnered to commence semi-annual tree pruning efforts that improves the health of roughly 20% of our Esplanade tree canopy each year, while also making the park safer for its visitors. This and other care provided by EA has led to significant growth to our trees throughout the Esplanade, which in turn heightens their ecological benefits to the public. Still, our inventories also reveal that the majority of the Esplanade's trees are considered mature to over-mature. Essentially, that our 100-year-old park would have trouble maintaining its current tree coverage levels absent an intervention. Last year, the Esplanade Association commissioned a tree care management succession planning study to understand what's needed to continue and grow healthy tree coverage on the Esplanade for generations to come. The draft results of that study were released earlier this month and are currently available on the front page of our website, esplanadeassociation.org. The study's recommendations will lead our organization and anyone who would like to partner with us to reinvigorate our tree canopy in the spirit of Olmsted's, Elliott's, and Shercliffe's original intent, while using modern technology and enhanced scientific knowledge for leading tree care practices. We will work to lessen foreseeable negative impacts on our trees, select diverse species of trees that are expected to fare better in our temperamental New England climate, broaden public education efforts aimed at tree protection and communicating the ecological benefits of our trees, and commit ourselves to providing the critical early life care that so many trees require and has been discussed much today. If there's one lesson from this story, I think it's that there's willing participants out there beyond constrained public sector budgets to support this broader effort. And don't get me wrong, the state through DCR and the city, primarily through the Parks Department, should be leading this charge and should each have a much greater role in the equitable growth of tree care coverage in parks and neighborhoods throughout the city. But with public-private partnerships of the type the Esplanade Association enjoys with DCR, we have an opportunity to learn from one another and broaden the impact of a shared desire to build Boston's tree population for decades to come. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Michael. And all the best at your July 4th celebration next month. Ford Cavallari is next. followed by Sam Balto, and then Karen Weber. Ford, Sam, Karen. Hello, Ford.
Great.
It's good
Hello.
to see you. Long time no see.
Councilor, it's been a while, hasn't it? Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Ford Cavallari. I am the chair of the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations, which represents the 9 largest neighborhood associations in the downtown area. And I'm here because trees, open space, and parks is one of the 5 key issues that the organization, our alliance, was founded around. And I wanted to share some observations on our journeys regarding trees, where I want to underscore how, while I am very pleased with all the planning and the myriad inventories that are going on, I have uncovered laws that are either incomplete or working contrary to the stated goal of increasing the tree canopy. And I want to put some attention on those goals, on those laws that I think are hurting us. I first became, sort of got pulled into the tree issue a number of years ago when a number of trees on the Harbor Walk were clear-cut. About a double-digit number of trees greater than 6-inch trunk diameter were just cut down. No hearing, no notice, nothing. And I wondered, how could that be? So I started asking folks, talked to Chris Cook, who I think Boston is so lucky to have as Parks Commissioner. Chris introduced me to Greg Mossman, who I think is one of the hardest working city employees. You're equally likely to find him to talk about issues like this, or if there's a microburst, he'll be out until 2 a.m. making sure that all the trees get handled and repaired, disposed of, et cetera. How 6 guys can do that is just amazing, and I do hope you guys think about throwing more funding into that area. But one of the things that I was concerned about was, like, how can you lose these trees? And what I found was that although if you're inland, the Chapter 87 laws that were discussed previously give some protections to trees, even though, as we have heard in some of the testimony, oftentimes the hearings that you would expect and are legally, folks are legally obliged to, oftentimes they don't happen. If you're on the waterfront, Chapter 91, oddly, has no tree protections. And it turns out that Chapter 91 on the waterfront trumps Chapter 87, so the experience of the North End in the Harbor Walk trees that were cut down was that, you know, they're cut down, there's really no law. I talked to someone, a high-level person at BPDA, and they said, yeah, when they were drafting this part of the law, they just sort of never finished, and they never got that part. Wouldn't it be great to complete the law and protect trees? And so the first thing I ask is, let's do that. Because when I asked the question, could someone a developer who promised a lot of trees on the waterfront, plants a lot of trees, and just decides to cut them down and put a tennis court in? Obviously, they'll get a lot of unhappy neighbors, but is there any legal protection to prevent that? And I have yet to find anyone who will say, yes, there is a legal protection that will stop that. So this is an example of an incomplete law, and I really do think if we are serious about absorptive capabilities of trees to combat tidal rise, which is an increasing problem, we really need to protect trees on the waterfront. The second area of laws that I wanted to put in the spotlight are those that I think work counter to trees. While everyone, I think, in this room supports ADA laws, there are some neighborhoods to which I believe they're interpreted in an extreme fashion. There are neighborhoods like Beacon Hill and the North End that have narrow streets that are constantly fighting to save trees that are on streets because we're repeatedly told that the streets are just too narrow, we're going to have to clear cut all the trees. There is a rational balance that we can find, but we really need to make sure that we're getting these laws to foot with one another. And right now, they don't. And I think we've lost a whole bunch of trees, and we've heard a lot of testimony about the trees that can't be replaced because they are deemed to not be in compliance with the newest and I think the most extreme interpretations of the ADA codes. So I would ask that we, oftentimes the strategies can be great, they can be laid out, we can have great bold visions, but the trick is in the implementation, as we've seen on other issues and will see on other issues. Here it's the same way. Unless we can fix Chapter 91 and we can reconcile the ill effects of the ADA laws, we're going to have a bunch of laws on the books that are actually hurting trees, and I hope that we can address that sooner rather than later. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ford. Larry's done. So next, we're getting there, folks. Sam Balto, followed by Karen Weber, and then looks like yes was marked and then scribbled. So
I think Sam left.
Sam had to leave.
He was with the baby.
Yep.
I think he left.
Okay. So thank you, Sam. So Karen Weber, you are up, and then Elena Saporta. I'm not sure if Elena wants to speak, followed by Fatima Ali Salam. No Sam Balto, so Karen Weber, and then is Elena here? Sure. All right, so after Elena would be Fatima. Fatima, you are after Karen, and that is all I have for public testimony. So if anyone else would like to testify, I would be happy to hear you out, but that's what we've got. So Karen, hello, good afternoon.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ayanna. This has been really a wonderful hearing and a chance to really bring the community together about something that seems to some perhaps trivial. It's a tree. But to us who understand the importance of a tree and how the tree makes a forest, and it's our urban forest, this is very important. So as you know, I run the Foundation for a Green Future and Boston Green Fest. I'm also a parent on the Citywide Parent Council. So I'm speaking about 4 points as briefly as I can. Number one, I used to have a beautiful tree in front of my home. I watched it cut down with my children, cried when it happened, and then they planted a new tree, and we were so happy we had this new tree. It ended up with some disease, and they took it out. And one day I came home, and they had tarred over the tree well. I felt like I was closed up. Like, how could they tar that tree well? I was going to plant flowers there. If we couldn't put a tree, at least we could put something. So I want to try to understand, why are any of these tree wells being tarred over without checking with the neighbor, the person whose house it's in front of, to find out what they're planning to do for that. So that's number one. Number two, we're talking about very creative things. Earlier with the first panel, they talked about the various agencies in the city who are working to help with trees. But there was one very important group left out, the Boston Public Schools. I really believe that there may be a way to help get kids out, get them more fit, get them in the sunshine, get them learning about trees. Let's make a curriculum where the children in our schools, starting from the young ones all the way to high school, are going to become that brigade that help plant the trees, maintain the trees, learn about the trees. It's their biology, it's math, it's science, it's everything. So let's get them involved. That's 40,000 kids across the city. So that's one other area. Three, you're probably aware I'm very committed to green roofs. So we're talking about trees that in the city, there's only so much space in the city. Yes, we have to plant the harbor. Yes, we have to plant our streets in the neighborhoods. But when we look at our city, there's not enough space in the city to really make a fullest canopy. And all the buildings that are going up right now, not one of them is green on the outside. There's metal and glass and cement. I have not seen any nature as part of that. So let's put some trees on the roofs as well. Finally, in terms of climate adaptation, we need to be creative. And I know that it was mentioned a few times, but let's find ways to incorporate trees into every part of the plan of the city, not just 5 or 6 ways, but I'm sure we can find some way to make the tree become part of a budget of almost anyone's budget, even down to whether it's music, whether it's down to whatever aspect. I feel that you're both very creative thinkers. The city council is very creative. Our city is thinking in very, so let's include it. When we talk about climate adaptation, I haven't heard about saving the trees as part of that, but let's make it a whole global one. And finally, to leave you with this quote, and I'm going to change it a little bit. And into the urban forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Well said. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. So Fatima is next, and that is all I have. Would anyone else whose name DB? So after Fatima, you could just line up. DB is next. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Fatima. Welcome.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is Fatima Al-Islam. I'm a 40-year resident of the neighborhood of Mattapan. Mattapan is unique in the city.
You may just want to get a little bit closer if you wouldn't mind. Sorry. It's
Mattapan is a little bit unique in that we have one of the largest undeveloped natural land resources in the city of Boston. So we have had a lot of tree canopy, as been pointed out, but we are increasingly losing it to development because just as our undeveloped land has become recognized by those who need to develop more housing, but also other types for schools and recreation areas. But unfortunately, one of the things that comes about it is that it doesn't include the residents necessarily in the input process. One of the reasons is that Mattapan, unlike other parts of the neighborhood, other neighborhoods like Chebinka Plain and Dorchester, we do not have a Mattapan neighborhood council that actually interacts directly with all of the developers. We are beginning those planning stages, but we don't have one set up yet. As a result, where I live in Mattapan, right at the beginning toward Mattapan Square, I'm fortunate that I live along what's called the Neponset Greenway, to which we had been opened up about a year ago. But what has happened is that that's actually, for many of us, the only swaths of trees. On my street, there are no trees at all. If you live along the Greenway within the direct in Mattapan, there are plenty of streets that have no trees that grow on them. We literally only get our canopy from the Neponset River. The trees that line the river, some of them are in good health, many of them are not. Part of that has to do with the longstanding tradition of people who are in the construction business of dumping their waste over the walls directly. There's a wall that was built during the WPA projects, or starts about 4.5 to 6 feet high, so they can hide their debris. They come in the middle of the night and they toss it. So what happens is that the poisoning of the lands and many of the trees end up dying that way, and they just fall. The other issue that we have for Mattapan is that many of parts of our land are actually either privately owned by, say, the Massachusetts Audubon Society, or they're held by DCR. DCR doesn't necessarily respond to residents' requests the way that the city of Boston does respond to residents' requests. One of the other issues that we have is, say, for example, the Boston Nature Center, which is owned and operated under the Mass Audubon Society. Large tracts of those lands, which line up on Morton Street and Walk Hill Streets, those have been given over to private development for housing mainly, a large swaths of that. So what we're seeing right now, even though we're one of the smaller neighborhoods, is that we're losing canopy. We're also losing canopy because along streets such as American Legion Highway, the trees that are more mature, they're split by power lines. So when you have the growth, you can actually see it growing and splitting in half straight up. On my way here, one of the things that I've noticed over the last few months is a number of dead birds that I see that are dead along American Legion Highway and Blue Hill Avenue and along some of the smaller streets, but you do see it. And the reason I see is that I'm cleaning up the dead birds, to which I've never had to do before. I know that Mattapan is one of, just like East Boston, is part of the city's next big planning development plans they're supposed to put in place. But recently we, for example, have found that there are people who are coming in to pre-file soon to build developments that could be possibly 13 stories high in Mattapan Square for apartment building, to put 100 parking spaces, to which they literally have, I'd say, maybe 100 yards down Mattapan Station, why you would think that you could have the possibility of even going to the city and saying, yes, I want to build a development that has 100 parking spaces and 13 stories high, making it the highest building in Mattapan. But it doesn't take into consideration the natural flow of vegetation, of waterways that we have in our space. Mattapan is unique because it has on one side of it Milton, it has the Blue Hills, it has a river going through it that continues, that's actually 127 miles long, so it goes outside of the city. If the city doesn't address it, though, in conjunction with other state agencies, we're going to lose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all I have for those that have signed in, but if others would like to testify, DB, we'll start with you, and anyone else can line up behind DB.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much to the councilors who are here. I want to just make clear that even though I'm an employee of the city and I work for a city council, I'm testifying as a private citizen. And I want to call attention to Alston Brighton, which is out of sight and out of mind. Alston Brighton has the lowest proportion of green space per acre and per person in the city. And I think a lot of what goes on there is just never seen or observed. And so I just wanted to mention, also, as you all know, I'm sure Alston Brighton is the site of extraordinary institutional expansion, as well as private development. When Boston College bought what was the Archdiocese property, and that was 67 acres of green space, that is now all gone, all, for 2 stadiums. There was a 5-acre lot that had never been developed, not far from there, that also Boston College purchased, completely clear-cut. And in all of these buildings, I mean, that's for housing, there's not a single solar panel. I mean, they have not 24-hour day, they have as much sunlight as any buildings could have. But, and I could actually, go on. We've been talking about mature trees. There was another development that had these unbelievably beautiful copper beaches, gone and replaced with shrubs and some grass. And we used to have many urban wilds. We have either 1 or 2 now. So I just want to say that as we're paying attention to taking care of our mature trees, as well as, doing whatever replacement we can to keep our eye on and hold responsible institutions, and perhaps even, make that part of master plan agreements that they have to protect or replace the tree cover that they take down, because clean air and all the other health benefits that you particularly talked to Councilor Presley. Thank you.
Thank you, DB.
Thank you, DB. Thank you. Sir?
Hi, I'm Ian Leahy. I'm the Director of Urban Forest Programs at American Forests, or a national conservation group. Just want to let you know we are partnering with Alliance Data and Bank of America and Speak for the Trees to help bring resources in to help achieve what you're doing wherever we can help. To answer an earlier question, or help answer, I was kind of surprised. I'm just here trying to absorb everything and learn what's going on, but 3 arborists is surprisingly small for a city of Boston size. For example, Washington, D.C. has about 20 working throughout the city. They have a budget of about $15 million. Milwaukee has a good model where they integrated tree care with the snow care and their staffing, and really built a high capacity there. And lastly, I just want to let you know about a new resource called the Vibrant Cities Lab. It's at vibranttcitieslab.com, and it's a site that we built with the U.S. Forest Service. It has all the latest research synthesized. It has case studies from across the country and a toolkit to help build step-by-step to build urban forestry programs the way that you're talking about. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Leahy, and welcome. Thank you. Anybody else like to offer any? Yes, please. Just if you could state your name and if you have an affiliation or your address.
I'm Steve Kendall. I am one of the city arborists with Parks.
Hi,
I'm
Steve.
going to speak sort of half professionally and half as a citizen of the city. everything I've heard today. It's great that we're addressing all this stuff. The thing that has stuck out to me, and I think the thing that I feel the most passionate about, is the inequality portion of it. I think our working class neighborhoods in Boston, you see less community involvement and engagement, and you see less, you see less tree canopy as a result, and that's so easily seen as a, somehow a community failing. I see it as people whose priorities are exactly where they should be. They're working harder, they're working longer hours, and to spend an hour a week watering a tree in front of your house is just a lot harder thing to get up and get into doing. And I think instead of trying to focus on asking more from the constituents, I think that a lot of the development that we've seen and that we are seeing in the city, we're offering tax breaks and incentives for these huge companies to come in. And I understand why we do that. I mean, it makes total sense, but I think there could be a commitment to our underserved communities who, these are people who are at the bus stop at 4 a.m. and, having to deal with public transit and suffer through the weather and then get home and then, help their families out. Like, they just don't have time to form a great community group. And what those groups do is, I've only been with the city a couple of years, and I'm so impressed by their dedication, but it's a lot harder to get that kind of mobilization depending on the demographics of the neighborhood, because if you have to work a second job, there's your volunteer time, So I think that asking more of some of the developers and some of the companies that we're always trying to get to come in because we need more jobs and we need innovation, to have them put more of a focus on reaching back into the community and helping us make the quality of life more even and more consistent throughout the city. I think that's something that could really help us as a division, help all of us as a city. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate those remarks, and thank you for your good work with the Parks Department. Would anybody else like to offer any concluding remarks? Seeing or hearing none, I'll ask my colleagues to make a brief closing statement before I close out this hearing, starting with the lead sponsor, Councilor Presley.
Thank you, Chairman O'Malley, and just I think in my 8-year tenure on the council, this has been one of the most robust and spirited and well-attended, both here and online. DB, thank you for talking about urban wilds. We did get a Twitter question. Has anyone talked about urban wilds today? So just goes to show that people are engaged and closely following the hearing online. So I thank the chair for your partnership on this and your stewardship on so many other environmental issues. We'll be conferring shortly after this hearing about next steps and where we go from here. And I just thank everyone for your participation and for caring, and also for being so prescriptive in what you offered, because that will help to light the path for us coming out of this so that we can achieve these greater goals relative to tree canopy and all the other issues that were highlighted here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say thank you again to Councilor Presley for sponsoring this important hearing. I did have to step out earlier for an event here at City Hall for Caribbean Heritage Month. So look forward to reading through the testimony and looking online to see what I did miss. I always like to hear that piece of the meeting, so I feel bad that I just caught the tail end. What I did catch was really good. I appreciate the focus on equity and how we approach this issue as well as many others in our city through an equity lens. So again, I want to thank those who came, those who are still here, those who are watching at home, and again, to the lead sponsor and the chair, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. I want to thank you and Councilor Presley and Councilor Janey for your work, hard work, and leadership on this issue. I want to thank the panelists that were here. And most importantly, I want to thank the public for coming here today and offering great comments, great advice, great suggestions. You know, Boston is a great city because of your involvement. The passion in your voice and the love you have for the city is so noticeable, and Boston's lucky to have so many dedicated people that really care about this city. That's what I want to focus on, is making sure that the neighborhood voice is heard in this process, and that will be a focus of mine going forward. Again, just want to say thank you to all three councilors that are here, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I took copious notes during public testimony simply because I have worked with virtually everyone who has spoken or who did speak at one point or another, and I'm just briefly going to go through them, and you'll get my point when I'm done reading. We need to focus on canopy, not inventory. We need to focus on inventory, and that'll take care of canopy. We need to work on policy. We need to work on maintenance. We need to plant older or mature trees. We need to plant samplings or younger trees. We need to look at Pittsburgh, Portland, Houston. We need to look at our existing laws, some of which can run counter to what we're trying to do here. We need to discuss jurisdictional oversight. We need to focus on the forgotten neighborhoods. We need to ask more for developers. There's some conflicting sentences there, yet everything I said was correct. And I think that underscores everything I said, paraphrasing what you all said is correct. And I think that underscores the complexity of what we're trying to do here. The good thing, or the good news, as I said from the beginning, is we all agree. We all know the benefits of more trees. We all see the incredible desire to build and to grow that canopy. Rather than focusing on what didn't go right in the past, I think we need to look at the 2014 survey as the first benchmark. I think we as councilors need to make sure we have funding for the next benchmark survey in 2019 or 2020. And clearly we need to work together, all of us, Friends Group, residents, city officials, elected officials. We need to work together on drafting some sort of a master plan and some sort of an idea going forward, how we can address this. Some of it will be legislation. Others could be just simple policy changes. I'm working with many of you on a whole host of issues that dovetail nicely with this. As we talk about net zero carbon, this is a way to address it. As we talk about community choice energy, renewable energy, as we talk about the plastic bag ordinance, as we talk about the gas leaks bill, these are all intersectional here, and we need to work on it together. So I know you have my colleagues and my commitment. We're going to continue to work together. We're going to see what we can do going forward. This is a big tent. This isn't going to be solved overnight. We're not going to have an ordinance on the books, you know, a week from now, but we're going to work together to see what makes sense and how we can actually affect real change. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. This was a phenomenal hearing, 3 hours long, and we touched upon a really, just a whole host of important issues, and we've got a lot of work to do. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. With that, it is nearly 1 o'clock, and this hearing is hereby adjourned.